Chapter 922. That. Is it really okay for Ms. Ishtar to go to the underworld? Matthew, who had read Mesopotamia's mythology, knew very well that Ishtar arrogantly entered the underworld and was killed by the goddess of the underworld. As a servant, the inheritance of being killed by the goddess of the underworld may cause the underworld to impose some restrictions on Ishtar. However, before anyone could answer Matthew's question, Ishtar's miserable scream came from the collapsed crater. Ah! No! Everyone looked at each other and smiled awkwardly. It turned out that Ishtar was forced by Wu-Ming. At this moment, Gadotsi suddenly realized a problem. By the way, how do we go down? The way to go down. Well, whether it's me or Nawakamaru, we don't have the means to safely enter the underworld. If you want to enter the underworld, you have to jump down. Merlin nodded proudly. Jump down. Roman, who was in Chaldea, couldn't help but exclaim. The instruments in Chaldea were interfered with, and they couldn't detect how deep the crater was. How could they jump down directly in this situation? Ms. Nawakamaru, let's not talk about this for now. Matthew sighed helplessly. Merlin, what are you so proud of? Gadotsi looked at Merlin with contempt. Nawakamaru put her thin green into the scabbard and also sighed. Right now, we can only wait for the Uruk's reinforcements to arrive before making a decision. There are only a few of us, and we can't enter the underworld. Nyo Ruowan was, after all, a former general. Before he could determine whether Wu-Ming, Ishtar, and the others needed reinforcements, he could not act on impulse. But, Mr. Merlin, if we take this opportunity to support the senior Villo, can we take down the goddess of the underworld in one fell swoop? Matthew had a bold idea. Yes, if we support Assassin, maybe we can take down the goddess of the underworld in one fell swoop, and then we can focus on the goddess of Warcraft. Thinking of this, Gadotsi excitedly pulled Matthew's hand and prepared to go to the underworld with Matthew. Wasn't it just jumping down? Previously, when they came to this singularity, they had also experienced the experience of falling from a high altitude. It was a new experience after all. However, Merlin blocked their way with his staff. It's not that easy. You two, listen to me first. Merlin denied Gadotsi's suggestion. The underworld is full of death energy, and ordinary people can't stay there for a long time. Even if you wear a special magic dress, you can only stay there for a short period of time. Besides, Nawakamaru and I can't help. At most, we'll be a burden to the Villo. He already has Ishtar, and we don't need to send a few more burdens to burden him. Merlin became serious. Legend has it that in the underworld of the Mesopotamia, the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, is the ruler of everything in the underworld. Any god in the underworld will be restricted by the underworld, and their divinity will be suppressed, making them powerless. Without divinity, they probably won't be weakened or suppressed, but if they aren't alive, I'm afraid they won't be able to exert their power. This was the opinion of Roman, who had urgently obtained information about the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal. That was why Merlin said that he couldn't help. Wait a minute. Won't Ishtar and Assassin be in danger? Gadotsi was a little panicked. Ishtar was killed by the goddess of the underworld, and Wu-Ming was a god in the Mesopotamia, Uruk Hyenryong. His divinity must be high, and Wu-Ming's current identity was a servant, not a living being. In that case, after entering the underworld, wouldn't they become the lambs to be slaughtered by Ereshkigal? But even if they are alive, there are still risks. Although the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, can't leave the underworld, as long as she is in the underworld, she can enjoy the authority of the underworld. This is the most powerful ability of the goddess of the underworld. Even if she faces a living being who can ignore the restrictions of the underworld, Ereshkigal won't be at a disadvantage. In short, if it's as recorded in the myths, the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal, is an invincible existence in the underworld. In the end, Roman added. In other words, Only the living, and I can ignore the suppression of the underworld's authority and cause harm to Ereshkigal. Matthew nodded. If that's the case, can't we enter the underworld to support them? Gadotsi suggested. However, Merlin shook his head again. Tachika, how can you be sure that you and Matthew will encounter the Villo first and not Ereshkigal? If it's just Matthew and Ereshkigal fighting alone, although the chances of winning are not zero, it's not high either. Also, don't forget that the two demonic beast commanders also fell into the underworld together. Merlin's words were like the last straw that broke the camel's back. Gadotsi didn't know what to say. At this time, Nuwakamaru, who had been quiet for a while, spoke. If it's only you and Matthew, if you encounter any one of them, even if Sir Matthew's shield can defend against the opponent's attack, it's only a matter of time before you lose. After all, the demonic beast commanders don't just have pure strength. And if you encounter both of them at the same time. Although Nuwakamaru didn't continue to speak, the result was inevitable death. As a surviving servant of the beheading operation, it can be said that I have a deeper understanding of the demonic beast commanders than you. Let's not talk about the lion-headed Wugger. The other demonic beast commander, Musumafu, is not an ordinary person. It's not an existence that a servant can face alone. After Nuwakamaru finished speaking, he walked directly toward the almost collapsed defensive barrier. I'm going to organize the soldiers and wait for the arrival of the Uruks people before making a decision, and I believe that Sir Hyunryong will be fine. After Nuwakamaru finished speaking and left, whether it was Gadotsi, Matthew, Roman, or Merlin, they didn't speak anymore, as if they were giving Gadotsi time to think. After a moment, Merlin opened his mouth. I'm also very worried about the Villo. After all, he is my close friend. However, worrying about him is useless. For now, we can only believe in the Villo. You must know that the Villo took the initiative to enter the underworld. Since he took the initiative to enter the underworld, then the Villo certainly won't make such a low-level mistake. Indeed, in the case of knowing that there is a tiger in the mountain, only those who had a card up their sleeves would do something like going to the tiger's mountain, otherwise, it would be a waste. Wuming was certainly not a person who would do something for free. He must have his own considerations. I know, I'm just a little bit worried about Assassin. At that moment, Gadotsi also recovered. Since it was already like this at this stage, then they should believe and wait. Chapter 923. Deep underground, in the underworld. After Ishtar's noble phantasm caused the earth to shake, the entrance to the underworld was opened. Wuming brought Ishtar into the underworld. When they arrived at a path that looked like a stone bridge, Wuming let go of Ishtar's ankle and took a deep breath. As expected, the place is filled with the aura of death. Not only that, it was dark everywhere. Along the way, there were one or two cages that looked like spears with a floating blue flame. The entire underworld was filled with darkness and faint blue light. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Ishtar was lying there in pain. She struggled to get up and held her head as if she was having a headache. After Ishtar was brought into the underworld by Wuming in a rather rough way, she had bumped into many things along the way. Ishtar's head was the most injured. When Wuming let go of Ishtar, Ishtar's head hit the ground first. As expected, I shouldn't have trusted your perverted character. Ishtar rubbed her head as she stared at Wuming fiercely. As Wuming used to deal with Ishtar, he knew her very well. Not only that, Ishtar also had to deal with Wuming. Indirectly, Ishtar also had a good understanding of Wuming. Ishtar already knew that this guy was a perverted person. Now, Ishtar had a deeper impression of Wuming's perverted interests. Ah, you despicable guy. You know that the underworld has a natural suppressive effect on the gods. Why did you bring me in? Ishtar walked up to Wuming in a threatening manner, his eyes ferocious as he vented his grievances. Because we need to chase after the magical beast commander. Wuming naturally turned his head, spread his hands, and shrugged his shoulders with a helpless look. But why did you drag me in? Why don't you just come in yourself? Ishtar hugged her head with both hands. Her eyes were empty, as if she was in the depths of hell. Although the underworld was hell to Ishtar in a way, cough cough. I'm not feeling too well. Maybe it's because of the death aura in the underworld. That's all. I'm leaving now. You can deal with the matter of the beast commander yourself. To put it bluntly, Ishtar wanted to escape. However, Wuming would not let Ishtar escape. Ishtar, help me kill the commander of the magical beasts and investigate the situation of the goddess of the underworld, Ereshkigal. Buzz, Ishtar's body glowed with a red light as if she was under a command spell. That was the embodiment of the coercive power of the dependent contract. Yes. Yes. Ishtar, who was about to turn around and leave, turned around and answered with difficulty. Oh. Damn you, Hyunryong. After that, Ishtar knelt on the ground with her hands on the ground and let out a sorrowful cry that moved even the underworld. Wuming's command from the dependent incarnation was different from the command spell. The command spell's command would be resisted to varying degrees depending on the details, the magic power of the servant, and other factors. The longer the command spell was delayed, the effect of the command spell would gradually weaken. Although the effect of the command spell could not completely disappear, in the end, the servant would be able to control the command spell to the extent that it would not affect them. However, Wuming's command came from the dependent incarnation. Wuming's ability to control his dependent was absolute. However, because Wuming and Ishtar signed a contract related to the magical beasts, Wuming could only use the magical beasts as the main command to forcibly control Ishtar. Under the influence of Wuming's command, the current Ishtar had no way to leave the underworld. Only by completing the command issued by Wuming, Ishtar could leave the underworld. Although it was somewhat inconvenient to use the command related to the magical beasts to control Ishtar, there was no other way. The existence of Wuming's dependent was basically voluntary. Only Ishtar was tricked by Wuming to sign a temporary contract. That was to say, the contract between the two would be completely lifted after the magical beasts were eliminated and the goddess of magical beasts was defeated. It was basically impossible to make Ishtar sign a contract with Wuming from the bottom of her heart. If it was really possible to make Ishtar obediently sign a dependent contract from the bottom of her heart, then Ishtar would not be so naughty before. Although Wuming also considered setting a word trap to make Ishtar his dependent permanently, Wuming considered that the disadvantages of making Ishtar his dependent outweighed the advantages, so Wuming gave up on the idea. Although Ishtar was the mistress of the sky in Mesopotamia and was a rather powerful goddess, she was also a willful fool. If Wuming really used a word game to trick Ishtar and make her his dependent, it would certainly solve the problem of Ishtar's willfulness once and for all. However, if Wuming really did that, it would probably be enough for Wuming to suffer. In the end, Wuming would definitely end up tricking himself. Just the attributes of being a fool and a loser could make Wuming suffer. Through the past, Wuming was very sure of this. Let's go, Ishtar. We came to the underworld for business. After knocking Ishtar's head, Wuming took the lead and walked along the road. Damn it, I didn't want to come to the underworld. You were the one who dragged me here. Ishtar was now feeling very wronged. Why am I so unlucky to meet this guy, Hyunryong? God, Father God, where are you? Your daughter is now suffering under Hyunryong. Come and save your daughter. Ishtar, who was clearly a goddess, prayed to God. It was enough to see that Wuming was driving Ishtar crazy. Your father once asked me to take good care of you, and now, I have a way to make you obedient. The way was of course referring to the dependent contract. Wuming turned around and looked at Ishtar, who was praying with her hands clasped together but was stunned by Wuming's words. I will teach you well during this time, stupid goddess Ishtar. In the end, Wuming gave Ishtar a rather pleasant smile, but this smile was like the smile of the devil in Ishtar's eyes. At this moment, before Ishtar could look forward to the cruel future, the roar of a magical beast came into their ears. Wuming and Ishtar looked at each other, both of their eyes were full of solemnity. Immediately, Wuming ran directly in the direction of the roar of the magical beast, and Ishtar had no time to look forward to the cruel future, and directly followed Wuming's footsteps. No matter what, dealing with the magical beast was the most important thing at the moment. Chapter 9:24. The one that roared must be the commander of the demonic beasts. There was no doubt about that. Not to mention that the mass-produced demonic beasts wouldn't be able to make such a loud roar. Even if there were some demonic beasts that weren't killed by Ishtar's noble phantasm and fell directly from the ground to the underworld, at such a height, even if it was a strengthened mass-produced demonic beast, it would still be severely injured. Moreover, it would only be a serious injury and not a light one. Perhaps, only the demonic beast commanders with extremely strong physiques could fall to the underworld unscathed. Then, what did the uninjured magical beast commander encounter that caused him to let out such a bluffing roar filled with shock and panic? The answer was that the demonic beast commanders were attacked by the garrulous spirits. The roads in the underworld went from the top to the bottom. They were all stone bridges that were naturally formed in the underworld. The stone bridges intersected with each other and extended downwards like a maze. But apart from that, there were also places where a few stone bridges converged to form a platform in the underworld. At this moment, Wuming and the rather reluctant Ishtar stood at the edge of a stone bridge and looked down at the platform that was formed by the stone bridges. There was a gigantic humanoid creature that was covered in red fur but had the head of a ferocious lion. It was one of the 11 demonic beast commanders, the lion-headed Wugger. Surrounding the tall Wugger was a group of skeletons with huge claws that didn't have legs. Their claws were as big as the heads of these skeletons. These skeletons were the garrulous spirits. The garrulous spirits emerged from all over the place and swarmed towards Wugger as if they had seen their enemy. Since these garrulous spirits had no legs and were in the underworld, they all floated in the air of the underworld. Because of this, these garrulous spirits were all over Wujul's body. His head, back, legs, claws, and even the mane on his neck were all firmly grasped by the garrulous spirits with their giant claws. No matter how hard Wujul struggled, he couldn't shake off the garrulous spirits. His physical attacks were basically useless against the garrulous spirits because they were spirits. Every time the garrulous spirit was torn apart by a claw, it would recover in less than a second. The garrulous spirit's claws, on the other hand, were firmly fixed on Ujar's body while constantly dealing damage to him. Claw marks appeared on Mount Wujul, and traces of blood appeared on Wujul's body, attracting even more garrulous spirits to swarm him. It had to be said that the demon commander's physique was truly tyrannical. If it were a servant, perhaps their spirit base would have already been forced to retreat after withstanding so many garrulous spirits' attacks. However, Wujur was still as lively as ever. Even the angry roar produced by the garrulous spirits was particularly powerful. The demon commander's physique is extremely strong, but it is precisely because of this that they appear to be in a predicament when facing spirits without a physical body. Like a commentator, Wuming said lightly, and Ishtar heard it clearly. However, Ishtar didn't care about it. But this is a demon commander that is comparable to the Father God. The implication was that only those ordinary mass-produced demons lacked the means to deal with spirits. For a demon commander that was not on the same level as a mass-produced demon commander, how could it only have an advantage in terms of physique? Wujul is the lion of the sun. It certainly can't be that its physique is far beyond imagination. After Ishtar finished speaking, as if to reflect Ishtar's words, Wujul finally stopped using its claws to deal with the garrulous spirits. Wujul opened its mouth wide, and a sun-like radiance appeared in the underworld. In an instant, the garrulous spirits that were attacking Wujul were stimulated and retreated. Some of the garrulous spirits that were particularly close to Wujul even died from the intense radiance. In the next second, the radiance hidden in Wujul's mouth turned into flames. The instant Wujul swung its head to the surroundings, the flames were like rays that shot out in all directions. The fire of the sun engulfed a large number of garrulous spirits, and a large number of garrulous spirits perished in an instant in agony. Although the garrulous spirits didn't let out any screams due to the fact that they were spirits, it didn't affect Wudjil's mood at this moment. Roar! Wudjil let out a victorious roar, and its roar echoed throughout the underworld. Why, aren't you going to attack? Now is a good opportunity to get rid of Wudjil, isn't it? Ishtar looked at Wuming. Although a sneak attack wasn't a good thing, this was war. In a war between humans and demons, the true essence of war was to win by any means necessary. Besides, demons didn't have human rights. A sneak attack would be over. However, Wuming still chose to wait and see. Don't worry, someone will come and take care of this guy. Just by killing a few garrulous spirits, it let out a triumphant roar that resounded throughout the underworld. Who did it think it was? It could only be said that this prototype Wudjil's brain wasn't as good as the prototype Ulidim that Wuming killed. It didn't understand whose territory it was. This was the territory of the underworld goddess, one of the three goddesses' alliance. The underworld goddess was an existence that was on par with the goddess of magical beasts. Demons of the goddess of magical beasts, why are you behaving so atrociously in my underworld? Why are you provoking me? The voice of a creator resounded throughout the underworld, and Wudjil subconsciously shut its mouth. Ishtar was so frightened that she trembled. At the same time, Ishtar also understood who Wuming was referring to when he said, "Someone will come and take care of Wudjil." It sounds a little like your voice. Wuming glanced at Ishtar. However, Ishtar rolled her eyes at Wuming. What nonsense are you talking about? This voice clearly belongs to Ereshkigal. Ishtar didn't want to talk about Ereshkigal. It could be said that other than Wuming, only Ereshkigal could give Ishtar a headache. After all, Ereshkigal had once stripped, pierced, and killed Ishtar when she was in the underworld. Before Ishtar could recall the past, Ereshkigal spoke again. Since you dare to behave atrociously in my underworld, prepare to die. Chapter 9:25. However, the words that sounded like a death sentence did not strike fear in Yukar. Although Wudjil had subconsciously shut its mouth, it did not mean that it was afraid. Perhaps this was what the saying, "the ignorant are fearless," meant. Roar. Perhaps Yukar's brain was really not working well. It actually roared at the majestic voice in the void as if it was provoking it. Is it crazy? Wuming, who could understand the language of the monsters, naturally knew what Yukar was doing. After translating and subtracting the profanities, it was more or less, bring it on. But Amir Yukar actually dared to challenge the goddess of the underworld alone. Both Wuming and Ishtar knew that Yukar would die without a doubt. As expected, after Wudjil let out a roar, black and gray stone pillars rose from the ground at irregular angles, as if they were dead. They firmly restrained Wudjil's limbs. Although the sudden restriction gave Wudjil a fright, he did not show any signs of panic or any other emotions. Wudjil actually used brute force to break the rock pillar into pieces. Roar! Yukar stomped on the rock pillars until they were crushed under its feet. Then, it let out another roar of victory. This guy is definitely done for. Ishtar could not bear to look at the scene in front of him. To provoke Ereshki Gale in such a manner, if the original Yukar was supposed to die, then perhaps even its soul would be shattered by Ereshki Gale. As the other half of Ereshkigal and Ishtar's trip to the underworld, Ishtar understood Ereshkigal quite well. After Wugol let out what he thought was a victorious roar, but it was actually a declaration before his death. More rock pillars rose from the ground and restrained Wugol's body and limbs. However, after being restrained once again, Wudjil was still about to use his brute force to break free. At that moment, the rock pillars instantly exploded and were replaced by spears of light. At the same time, they replaced the rock pillars to restrain Wudjil's body even more. That's Ereshkigal's spear. Ishtar frowned at the scene as if she recalled something bad. However, the light spears were no different from the rock pillars to Yukar. It was just a matter of whether they looked good or not. However, just as Wujir was about to use the brute strength his mother had bestowed upon him to break free from the spears of light, a large number of new spears of light instantly appeared on the spears of light. They pierced into Wujir's flesh, causing him to cry out in pain. Roar, roar, roar. The light spears didn't miss a single part of Yukar's body. From top to bottom, head, neck, shoulders, chest, back, waist, abdomen, legs, knees, arms, and joints, they didn't miss a single spot. And because they pierced into Yukar's limbs, waist, and abdomen, Yukar's brute force was sealed and he couldn't use it anymore. I didn't expect Yukar to be able to withstand this attack. From Ishtar's point of view, being pierced by these light spears in the underworld was basically equivalent to death. But Yukar relied on the strength of his body to prevent all the light spears from piercing into his body. I have to say, I really can't underestimate a magical beast commander. Ishtar's expression turned grave. She finally understood how powerful a magical beast commander was. If she were in Wujil's shoes, her spirit base wouldn't be able to withstand these spears of light without any defenses. She would have been pierced in an instant. It could only be said that one of the magical beast commanders, the original Wugol, was not very smart. Otherwise, with such a powerful physique, it would have been able to escape from the underworld before Aleshki Gaul made his move. But this Yukar was like a stubborn donkey. He didn't have the slightest intention to beg for mercy or repent. Instead, he opened his mouth and condensed the light of the sun again. Yukar's eyes were filled with the desire to kill and take revenge. How could this guy still want revenge in such a situation? Did he become arrogant because he didn't die time and time again? Or was Yukar really that confident in himself? Wuming felt that it was the former. No, this wasn't a problem of arrogance or confidence. To be more precise, it should be a problem with Yukar's brain. In the legends, it was described that Tiamat's son, Kingu, led the magical beasts to fight against the gods. The reason why Kingu led the magical beasts was probably because the magical beasts sired by Tiamat weren't intelligent enough. Wuming guessed that the reason why the demonic beasts lost was probably because there was a problem with their IQ. This might be the price to pay for obtaining great power. Tiamat's 11 sons are probably lacking in intelligence. Wuming shook his head regretfully. But then, for some reason, Wuming's nose suddenly itched and he looked like he was about to sneeze. This gave Ishtar a fright. She hurriedly slapped Wuming's mouth. Wuming stared at Ishtar. His eyes conveyed the meaning of, "You've got guts." But Ishtar stared back at Wuming. "Don't drop the ball at this time." Ishtar looked at Wuming with a dissatisfied expression. Just as Wuming was about to have a problem, Wujir also had a problem. In the next second, a Garrula spirit that was several times larger than the other Garrula spirits and about the same size as Yukar appeared above Yukar. This Garrula spirit held a huge, slender spear of light and slowly raised it high. Die. The Garrula spirit, who issued the majestic voice of Ereshki Gaul, was like the Grim Reaper who granted equal death to the people of the world. It raised its spear of light high up in the air and thrust it at Yukar. At this moment, Yukar finally sensed danger. If the spear of light pierced him from above, he would not be able to survive. As for whether he could pierce through its skull, Wujil didn't have the slightest confidence this time, because Wujil recognized that the huge Garrula spirit above its head was actually the goddess of the underworld herself. The spear of light in her hand was a genuine artifact that far surpassed the toughness of a magical beast's body. Roar! A beastly howl came from Yukar's mouth. It seemed that Yukar had sensed that true death was approaching. Pucci. Chapter 926. Blood splattered all over the rock platform, and Ujar stopped moving. Wuming, who had witnessed such a cruel scene, did not do anything. Ishtar, who did move, only felt pity for Ujar's intelligence. No wonder these demonic beast commanders have not taken down the humans even after 3 months. It's because of their intelligence. Ishtar had to admit that King Gilgamesh was indeed a virtuous king, but the intelligence of the demonic beast commanders was also a major factor that affected the demonic beast battlefront. Alright, the demonic beast commanders have been eliminated. Let's go. Ishtar said, and wanted to leave quietly without alerting Ereshkigal. But, haven't you noticed? We've been discovered long ago. Wuming looked at Ishtar in disdain. Wuming felt that Ishtar's intelligence was on par with the demonic beast commanders. As expected of an idiotic goddess. Is that so? But, at this point, Ishtar also noticed the problem. After Ereshkigal's giant Garrula spirit killed Ajar and absorbed his soul into the spear of light in her hand, she stood still and looked at Wuming and Ishtar. Although there were a lot of rocks covering the two of them, there was no doubt that Ereshkigal had discovered them. Ereshkigal is the mistress of the underworld. You can say that when we entered the underworld, Ereshkigal already knew. As the only god in the underworld, Ereshkigal's authority was beyond imagination. But that was all. That's true. Ishtar's shoulders drooped helplessly, and she looked powerless. Ereshkigal only spoke after Ishtar showed a powerless look, as if she was waiting to see Ishtar make a fool of herself. Yura Kyunryong, mistress of the sky Ishtar, I already know why you are here. The demonic beast Ajar has been killed by me, and the other demonic beast Musamafu has escaped from the underworld. There is nothing you want here, leave quickly. Wuming could not help but have a trace of doubt. Wuming also guessed that Ereshkigal might not attack him and Ishtar, but Wuming did not expect Ereshkigal to let him and Ishtar leave just like that. Obviously, the other party was a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance. Obviously, the other party was a goddess who was hostile to humans. How could she let them go so easily? Obviously, they were on the side of humans. How could she let them go so easily? Damn it. Just listening to Ereshkigal's arrogant tone made Ishtar quite angry. However, Ishtar's brain was not as bad as Ajar's. At that moment, Ishtar pulled Wuming's arm. You see, Ereshkigal also let us leave, let's go. However, Wuming was not moved, because Wuming came to the underworld not only to eliminate the demonic beast commander. Wuming's order to Ishtar was also very clear. Eliminate the demonic beast and investigate the underworld goddess. It's not easy to have the opportunity to get in touch with Ereshkigal, you can leave first. Wuming's order to Ishtar to eliminate the demonic beast commander had been completed, so the power from the dependence that restricted Ishtar from leaving the underworld had disappeared, and Ishtar could leave the underworld now. You want to face Ereshkigal alone. The original whisper was also raised a few decibels because of surprise. Hey! Although I don't want to admit it, you are the strongest on our side, right? How can you face one of the Three Goddesses Alliance alone? What if something happens? Ishtar lowered her voice as much as possible and leaned over Wuming's ear and nagged. However, the response to Ishtar was Wuming's palm. I actually let an idiot like you worry about me, how embarrassing. Wuming's palm pressed onto Ishtar's beautiful face, which could be considered as a response to Ishtar's previous slap on his face. Damn. I'm not worried about you. I'm just worried. If you die, my reward will go down the drain. Ishtar struggled to pull Wuming's hand up from her face while looking for an excuse for herself like a proud textbook. Helplessly smiling, Wuming finally persuaded Ishtar to leave. You should go back to the surface first, I'm a little worried about the escaped Musumafu. Ereshkigal would not lie about this kind of thing, so the other demonic beast commander Musumafu must have escaped. Looks like the demonic beast commander is not completely brainless like Wugger. At least the demonic beast commander Musumafu would escape, unlike the stubborn Wugger. In the end, Ishtar also compromised. I know, you be careful. After Ishtar finished speaking, she summoned the heavenly ship's horse Anna, placed her hand on the horse Anna, and Ishtar slowly rose. No matter what, since Ereshkigal is willing to let us leave, it probably means that she doesn't have any ill intentions towards us. However, when she said this, Ishtar felt awkward. How could Ereshkigal not have any ill intentions towards her? In short, you should be careful with your words, there shouldn't be any danger. You are the god that Enkidu once believed in, even if it's because of Enkidu who treated Ereshkigal with respect, she will still let you go. I know, you should leave quickly. I am your senior in terms of seniority. How can a junior instruct a senior? You, on the other hand, don't be ambushed by another demonic beast commander when you pass through the exit that connects the underworld to the surface. Musu Mafu must have escaped from the entrance to the underworld, which was the collapsed ground that Ishtar blasted open. It was impossible for it to escape from other places. I know. What a hateful guy, nagging like an old man. So what if you are my senior? Humph. Ishtar turned her head and left angrily. Old man. Wuming subconsciously touched his chin. Although he looked young, and was definitely much younger than Ishtar, he was someone who was on the same level as Ishtar's father, the main god of Sumer, and in short, he would definitely take advantage of Ishtar. What else do you want, Yura Kyenryong? The conversation between Wuming and Ishtar was actually being monitored by Ereshkigal. Although she was still speechless towards Ishtar, Ereshkigal was more concerned about why Wuming was looking for her. Ereshkigal knew that the reason Wuming was looking for her was definitely not as simple as the reason that Wuming used to brush off Ishtar. Ereshkigal, Enkidu's tomb is still there, right? Chapter 9:27. That's right. Wuming cared about nothing else but Enkidu's tomb. According to Gilgamesh of this world, after Enkidu of this world died, because Enkidu treated Ereshkigal with respect when he was alive, his corpse was buried in the underworld by Ereshkigal. In the Mesopotamia of the parallel world that Wuming experienced, Enkidu's soul was preserved by Wuming, and his corpse was given to Gilgamesh to deal with. It was probably buried in the underworld as well. After all, regardless of which world Enkidu was in, he respected Ereshkigal. Enkidu's tomb. The huge garrulous spirit that Ereshkigal transformed into shook its body and rejected Wuming in the end. Why should I tell thee? As it spoke, the huge garrulous spirit skeleton emitted a scarlet and terrifying light as if it was angry. I allowed you to leave because you only entered the underworld to hunt down magical beasts and didn't behave atrociously. I haven't even punished you for the crime of exploding the sky of my underworld. However, Wuming was not flustered at all. After the gods disappeared, the underworld should have disappeared as well. It's only because of your reappearance that the underworld returned with you. However, the underworld that returned with you should only be a part of it. Hearing this, the huge garrulous spirit maintained its fierce posture, but it did not continue with its next move. Wuming was right. If it was the underworld of the past, it would have spread throughout the entire Mesopotamia. However, after the gods disappeared, the mysterious existence of the underworld also disappeared. However, because Ereshkigal descended as a servant, as a goddess who could not leave the underworld naturally appeared with Ereshkigal. However, because it was an accessory of Ereshkigal, the underworld didn't appear as widely as before. You've guessed correctly. The underworld is indeed limited to Khazar city and the surrounding areas. Aleshki Gal admitted to it. Coincidentally, Khazar city was located in the northwest of Uruk. It was near the place where Ishtar had blown up half of the plains with her relic. That was why the underground of that place was connected to the underworld. And seeing Ereshkigal admit it, Wuming also gave an answer to this problem. If that's the case, you can move the underworld. That way, the entrance that was blasted open will no longer be an entrance. It will just be an ordinary hole. If it was only a part of the underworld, Ereshkigal could move it with her authority. Although the process might be slow and long, Ereshkigal could do it. Why should I choose to give in? The gigantic garrulous spirit that represented Ereshkigal was a little annoyed. Wasn't it the same as asking Ereshkigal to move a part of the underworld that came with her? Wasn't it the same as asking Ereshkigal to show that she couldn't defeat it? I'm doing this for your sake, Ereshkigal. Don't forget about the monster that escaped. It will definitely report the general location of the underworld to the goddess of magical beasts. It's a terrible thing for the base camp to be discovered, isn't it? This made Ereshkigal fall into deep thought. Indeed, because of its body, Musu Maf didn't fall directly into the depths of the underworld like usual. Instead, it fell very close to the ground. Moreover, it had a snake body, so it quickly climbed up the cliff and escaped from the underworld. If it really returned to the northern fir forest, it would definitely know about the situation in the underworld. In a situation where he was unable to leave the underworld, and the opponent still had several magical beast commanders with extremely strong physiques, Ereshkigal would indeed be at a disadvantage. Although Ereshkigal knew that the goddess of magical beasts' base camp was in the fir forest, she couldn't leave the underworld. It was only a few nights ago that she could use Ishtar's body, which represented her, to walk on the ground. Now that Ishtar was with Wu Ming and the others, the idea of using Ishtar's body to walk on the ground had become unrealistic. After saying so much, aren't you still thinking for the sake of humans? Although she didn't know why Wu Ming would suggest that Ereshkigal move the underworld, Wu Ming's actions were definitely not harmful to humans. Even if it wasn't for the sake of humans, it definitely wouldn't affect humans. Today, I will tell you that my underworld has already begun to expand and move. Once it succeeds, I will capture all the souls of humans and bring them to my underworld. I will build a kingdom of the dead filled with souls. In other words, you are protecting humans in disguise. Wu Ming's words stunned Ereshkigal, and she didn't know what to say. If it were any other gods other than the few Sumer gods who truly love humans who say that they want to protect humans, I might be suspicious. However, if it's you, Ereshkigal, I'm willing to believe it. Ereshkigal had been in the underworld since she was born until the gods retreated and the gods disappeared. It could be said that she didn't have much contact with the outside world. Moreover, because of her fixed position, Ereshkigal didn't have any thoughts of fighting for a god's position. She had been diligently taking care of the underworld. How could a god like her, who was destined to be restricted for her entire life, have any desire? Humans were born with good natures. It was the same for gods. A god who was set up after birth and didn't have much contact with the outside world didn't seem like a god who would harm humans. Although Wu Ming had never met Ereshkigal before, Wu Ming believed that Ereshkigal, who had been diligently taking care of the underworld for her entire life, wouldn't become an existence that opposed Mesopotamia. Most importantly, Ereshkigal buried Enkidu's body in the underworld because Enkidu treated her with respect. A god who could make Enkidu treat her with respect couldn't possibly be an evil god, right? You, what are you saying? The huge Garrula spirit's tone suddenly changed. This made Wu Ming jump, and he froze on the spot. This voice was almost exactly the same as Ishtar's. However, there was a shyness in this voice that Ishtar didn't have. Ereshkigal, who realized that something was wrong, immediately adjusted herself. Ahem. Anyway, my underworld will be decided by me. I will send the Garrula spirit and thou to guide the way. Once you're done inspecting Enkidu's tomb, leave immediately. As soon as she finished speaking, the huge Garrula spirit turned into a blood-red liquid and melted into the rocks of the underworld, disappearing. Chapter 928. Sure enough, there's more to it. If Wu Ming was only guessing about Ereshkigal before, then now Wu Ming was sure about Ereshkigal. He was sure that Ereshkigal was on the side of humans. However, Ereshkigal use deviated from the right path. In a sense, she was an enemy of humans. However, as long as her thoughts were for humans, there was a way to change her. This can be considered another breakthrough point for the three goddesses' alliance after Quizzer. If the goddess of the underworld also defected, 2 pillars of the 3 goddesses' alliance would be on Wu Ming's side. Then, the 3 goddesses' alliance would really exist in name only. In this way, humans could also deal with the goddess of Warcraft with peace of mind. However, Ereshkigal seemed to be quite extreme. It was better not to be too anxious. At that moment, Wu Ming decided to investigate Enkidu's tomb in this world first, and then make a decision about the next action. As early as the huge garrulous spirit transformed by Ereshkigal disappeared, a garrulous spirit the size of an ordinary person emerged from the crack of the rock and walked to Wu Ming. It stopped in place and seemed to be waiting for Wu Ming. "Let's go, take me to Enkidu's tomb." Although Wu Ming felt a little awkward, he felt a little sorry for Enkidu. At that moment, the garrulous spirit turned around silently and floated in a certain direction. "Over there." After looking at his general direction, Wu Ming followed the garrulous spirit. After all, Wu Ming still had to go back the way he came. The garrulous spirit's speed wasn't slow, but Wu Ming was able to keep up, so Wu Ming soon arrived in front of Enkidu's tomb. It was a small stone platform with empty spear cages around it. Chains wrapped around the spear cages and surrounded this place. It should be like this. At this moment, in Wu Ming's eyes, the spear cages around Enkidu's tomb were all crooked, and some were even pulled out. The chains around the spear cages were also violently broken and scattered on the ground. In the center of the stone platform, there was a pit that seemed to have been dug by a beast. Anyone could see that what was originally buried in this pit must be Enkidu's body, or the god's soil. As expected, Enkidu, your body in this world is gone. As if receiving instructions, golden light spots of light appeared on Wu Ming's body, a silver chain appeared and wrapped around Wing's arms and waist. Clank clank, the chains clanged against each other, as if they were responding to Wu Ming. Did the demonic beasts do this? Or did Gidea's minions do this? The traces left behind told Wu Ming that the one who took away Enkidu's corpse wasn't an elegant person. To be able to leave behind such a messy scene, it was either a monster without much rationality or one of Gaia's minions, one of the 72 demons. After all, from the appearance of Enkidu on the side of the demonic beasts and the fact that Enkidu's body was stolen, the other party was definitely not on the side of humans. But after thinking about it carefully, Wu Ming rejected both possibilities. "I'm afraid Gaia did it herself." "Master, why are you so sure?" At this time, Wu Ming's head lit up. The seemingly ordinary dragon horn headpiece made a sound. Because the timeline doesn't match, Wu Ming casually answered Callis, and then explained to her in detail. The demonic beasts were produced by the goddess of demonic beasts, and Enkidu obviously appeared together with the goddess of demonic beasts, so it was unlikely that the goddess of demonic beasts did it. The demon god pillars could appear in various eras of human history and disrupt those eras, making those eras become singularities. It seemed like they traveled through time and space, but if observed carefully, those eras were all after the Magic King's era. The demon god pillars were passed down from generation to generation. When they reached a certain era, they would awaken and disrupt human history. "Master, how do you know this?" Callis was puzzled. "Because, when I was in Atlas Courtyard, I met Sherlock Holmes." At that time, when Gadazzi, Matthew, and Leonardo da Vinci were brought into Atlas Courtyard by Sherlock Holmes, Wu Ming followed behind them. When Gadazzi, Matthew, and Leonardo da Vinci left Atlas Courtyard, Sherlock Holmes, who had already deduced that Wu Ming would come, had a conversation with Wu Ming in Atlas Courtyard. The reason why Wu Ming appeared behind Gadazzi and others was because Wu Ming had just come out of Atlas Courtyard. After all, the other party is a detective, and he even used a 3-pointed Hermes. There were some things that I needed his help with, so I went to look for him. At that time, Callis fell into the box world with Wu Ming's body, so it was normal that she didn't know about these things. If Callis was here, there would be no need for Callis at all. Callis' database is 100 times stronger than a detective's brain. Callis' tone was a little sour. Indeed, if Collis had followed Wu Ming the whole time, with Collis' ability, there would be no problem answering Wu Ming's questions through every little thing along the way. Unfortunately, Collis wasn't by Wu Ming's side at that time. Helpless, Wu Ming could only ask Wu Ming for help. It's just a coincidence that you weren't here. Don't be jealous, my exclusive magic costume is lapis lazuli, Collis Barrett. At that moment, Collis didn't speak anymore, as if she was shy. But, a shy magic costume. It could only be said that it was indeed the work of Gemstone Master, and the emotional system was also at the peak of its level. In short, including Winterwood City, the first 7 singularities were all created by a technique called the Demon God Pillar that was hidden in the human genes and passed down to a fixed age. In this year 2655 BC, the Demon God Pillar couldn't have appeared no matter what, so this singularity could only be handled by Gidea personally. Although Gidea could also teleport the Demon God Pillar to this singularity, Wu Ming's intuition told him that this singularity was set up by Gidea without anyone else's help. Then, in other words, Enkidu's body might be the real Enkidu. The silver chain on Wu Ming's hand couldn't help but shake, as if it was angry that its body was being used by the enemy. Gently pacifying the restless silver chain, Wu Ming fell into deep thought as he recalled the past. No wonder that Enkidu had a strange reaction when it saw me. Perhaps Enkidu's body affected the unknown soul within. At that moment, Wu Ming revealed a smile. But, since it's the real Enkidu in a certain sense, it's very advantageous for us. Because, the only god that Enkidu believed in and served was the Uruk Hyunryong, which was also Wu Ming himself. Chapter 929. After Wu Ming finished investigating Enkidu, he came to the surface from the underworld through the ground that was blown up by Ishtar. Putting the fake Enkidu aside, Gadotsi, Matthew, and the others were still on the surface. Although Merlin was there, and Gadotsi and Matthew wouldn't go to the underworld to find him, they definitely wouldn't leave. Maybe they were still waiting for him nearby. No matter what, he had to go up and say hello, and then go back to Uruk. And Wu Ming hadn't gone back to Uruk since he returned to Mesopotamia. It would be good to report to Gilgamesh about Enkidu. Standing at the edge of the collapsed ground, Wu Ming looked back at the huge crater behind him and nodded. This way, the demonic beasts can be prevented from coming here. It was an unexpected surprise. After all, the surrounding area had collapsed, and the demonic beasts couldn't choose to enter the underworld and then climb up. That was equivalent to provoking Ereshkigal, and they would definitely be killed. While Wu Ming was talking, the girl's excited voice came from behind him. Assassin! Wu Ming turned his head and saw Gadotsi running while waving at him, and Matthew was behind her with a panicked face. For a moment, Matthew, who was a demi-servant, couldn't catch up with Gadotsi, who was an ordinary human. Senpai, please slow down. When she was close to Wu Ming, Gadotsi suddenly flew toward Wu Ming. Wu Ming quickly opened his hands, took a few steps forward, and caught Gadotsi. Assassin! Are you okay? Gadotsi looked worried. However, Wu Ming knocked Gadotsi's little head. If you're so impatient, I'll be in trouble. Senior, ha 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 ha. Matthew, who came to the two of them, was panting heavily and looked quite uncomfortable. Because he was too anxious to catch up with Gadotsi, Matthew didn't have much time to catch his breath. Look at you, Matthew. Don't do this again. Wu Ming immediately let go of Gadotsi, and went to Matthew's back to rub Matthew's back. He then injected his mana into Matthew's body to relieve Matthew's fatigue. I'm sorry, Matthew. I was too anxious. Gadotsi also came over to apologize to Matthew. When she found out that Wu Ming's spirit base was nearby, she immediately ran over. It's okay. Senior. I understand that you're worried about Vi. Senior Villo. Although he was relieved, Matthew was still panting heavily. It seemed that he needed a little rest. Tachika, you should calm down in the future. A demonic beast commander escaped. If you're so rash, it will be troublesome if it ambushes you halfway. Gadotsi didn't care about anything just now. After receiving the news that Wuming appeared here, she directly ran over. Matthew was also worried about Gadotsi's safety, so he was out of breath and followed her. Don't worry about that. The demonic beast commander has left. A voice came from behind Wuming. Wuming turned his head and saw that it was Ishtar. You're okay. That's great. Wuming's tone was rather flat as he nodded. Ishtar knew very well what Wuming meant by nothing happened. Wuming meant that Ishtar was not ambushed by the demonic beast commander. However, knowing was one thing, but Wuming's perfunctory attitude made Ishtar quite unhappy. You bastard. I was worried that Ereshkigal would imprison you in the underworld, and you're actually looking forward to something happening to me. At that moment, Ishtar was like an angry cat, staring fiercely at Wuming. Miss Ishtar was indeed ambushed by Musu Maf nearby, but because we were all stationed not far away, nothing happened to Ishtar. Matthew, who had recovered his breath, also began to explain. Humph. Who would have thought that that guy was actually hiding underground? It actually managed to hide such a huge thing. Ishtar became irritated at the thought of this. It could be said that if it weren't for Wuming's reminder, she would have been eaten by Musu Maf by now. Devouring a god would bring about considerable growth for a demonic beast. It was the same reason why Yulidin wanted to devour Wuming. It was no wonder that Musu Maf would hide and wait like a sinister viper. Sure enough, the demonic beast commander isn't all brainless. After all, those brainless demonic beast commanders were most likely dead, and the remaining ones were probably some meticulous fellows. Wuming couldn't help but become serious. I'm sorry, Ishtar. It's my mistake. I should have let you leave with me. Wuming really didn't expect that Musu Maf would actually ambush here. The reason why he said demonic beasts might ambush was just to scare Ishtar and Gadotsi. After all, those who escaped in such a situation would definitely choose to leave. In the end, Musu Maf actually chose to ambush them. It could only be said that Musu Maf was bold enough. If Wuming and Ishtar were to come out together, and if Wuming were to find out, Musu Maf would definitely follow in his footsteps today. Wuming couldn't let the tiger return to the mountain no matter what. Wuming really regretted that he didn't let Ishtar stay a little longer. Wuming's regretful expression in Ishtar's eyes turned into self-blame for her danger, which made Ishtar didn't know what to say for a while. Wuming apologizing to Ishtar in such a serious way was really rare for Ishtar. It could be said that it was basically impossible for such a situation to happen. The relationship between the two was actually not that bad, but basically every time they met, they would have to mock and ridicule each other. It had almost become a habit. Ishtar was also affected by the girl's body this time as a pseudo-servant, so she didn't quarrel with Wuming. However, Wuming wasn't a pseudo-servant, and he wasn't affected by it. How could he apologize so easily? This made Ishtar feel quite awkward. At the moment, Ishtar also began to speak hesitantly. This is not your fault, after all, you also told me, if I could come out with you, I would definitely not let Musumafu escape. I really missed a great opportunity to kill another demonic beast commander. Wuming clenched his left fist and hammered his right hand, directly interrupted Ishtar's speech, and his expression became even more regretful. As the saying goes, the more you think about it, the angrier you get, the more you take a step back, the more you think about it. Wuming's current state was more or less the same. However, Wuming's words made Ishtar, Gadotsi, and Matthew stunned on the spot. The meaning of Wuming's words was already very obvious. He wasn't worried about Ishtar, but he regretted missing the opportunity to kill the demonic beast commander. Gadotsi and Matthew couldn't help but swallow their saliva, silently looking at Ishtar, who had lowered her head and exuded a terrifying aura. Sure enough, Ishtar also lived up to everyone's expectations and shouted out what Gadotsi and Matthew thought was right at the moment. You bastard! Chapter 930. After Wu Ming made a scene with Ishtar, the four of them returned to the nearby encampment. This was a place close to the defensive barrier. Although it had not collapsed yet, many of the barriers were already in a state of collapse and were about to collapse. However, they could still be used temporarily after temporary repairs. Not only that, under the command of Nuwakamaru, the soldiers also set up temporary tent-like residences adjacent to the defensive barrier. Oh, you all returned safely. I knew that nothing would happen. Merlin was the first to come out of the tent to welcome everyone. However, it seemed that you guys were a little noisy just now. I was very self-aware and didn't come out. If Merlin had also joined in, the situation would have become even more serious. It's just that the joke was a little too harsh, and someone couldn't take it. Wu Ming said and glanced at Ishtar. Humph. Ishtar snorted and turned her head to the side after realizing that Wu Ming was looking at her. Gadotsi and Matthew saw this scene and smiled helplessly and awkwardly. In short, the two people who went deep into the underworld have returned safely. Although the commander of the magical beasts, Musu Maf, was released, the other commander of the magical beasts, Wugger, was killed in the underworld for provoking the goddess of the underworld. Mashu began to report and smiled. One of the commanders of the magical beasts was killed and the other escaped, but we have 0 casualties in the end. There's no better result than this. Indeed, putting the number of enemies aside, the number of casualties on their side was the most important thing. The demons did not rush to the fortress. The collapse of the fortress was entirely the result of Ishtar's noble artifact. Therefore, the soldiers did not suffer any casualties. Needless to say, Gadotsi and the others did not suffer any casualties. The task of killing and chasing the demons was completed by Ishtar and Wu Ming. It was just that when Ishtar flew up, he was almost ambushed by Musu Maf. However, because Ishtar was vigilant because of Wu Ming's words, Musu Maf's ambush failed. Although Wu Ming was quite upset that Musu Maf managed to escape. Moreover, the ground here has also collapsed because of Ishtar's noble phantasm. It's directly connected to the underworld. I'm afraid that the magical beasts will have to take a detour even if they want to come here. Wu Ming added. It could be said that this was undoubtedly a man-made natural moat. In other words, we don't need to set up defensive facilities here. Gadotsi expressed her opinion. Even so, we have to consult with King Gilgamesh before we can make a decision. Nuwakamaru walked over from the camp behind everyone and expressed his opinion. Why don't we talk in the tent? We can also let Mr. Hyunryong have a good rest. Nuwakamaru pointed at the tent not far behind him. Wu Ming shook his head and declined. I'm not tired. I'm just taking advantage of the situation to have a chat here. After all, they were almost all here. If there was anything, they could just stand there and simply summarize it. There was no need to sit down and have a formal discussion. Besides, we do have to consult with Gil. Besides, I have something to report. I'm going to return to Uruk immediately. Gadotsi was stunned when she heard Wu Ming's words. Then what should we do? Gadotsi and the others originally received the first order given to them by King Gilgamesh to go to the jungle in the southwest to help the Quetzalcoatl. However, they didn't even see the Quetzalcoatl's face before they were led by Wu Ming to the Abif Mountains in the northwest. They were directly across the Mesopotamia. The first order was such a mess. Not to mention, Gadotsi and the others couldn't continue to stay here. Even if they didn't go to Uruk with Wu Ming, they had to return to the jungle in the southwest. The most important thing was that Anna was still there. Senior Villo, why don't you send us back to the jungle? Matthew felt that since Ishtar had been recruited, they should go back and meet up with Anna. I'm not going to leave you here. Come back to Uruk with me. After Wu Ming finished speaking, he looked at Ishtar. You also come back to Uruk with us to see Gil. Ishtar was dumbfounded. Hey! In Uruk City, in a corner near the Divine Tower, dark purple ripples suddenly appeared. Wuming, Gadotzi, Matthew, Anna, Merlin, and Ishtar, who was very reluctant but didn't dare to say anything, walked out of it. Although Ishtar was very reluctant, Wuming ordered her to come with them, saying that she had to discuss with Gilgamesh about the crusade against the monsters. Although the price was that Ishtar had been verbally attacking Wuming along the way, after arriving at the jungle in the southwest, Wuming and Ishtar were alone for a while. Gadotzi and the others didn't know what happened, but Ishtar became much more obedient after returning to the team. After that, Wuming found Anna, but because he still didn't see the Quetzalcoatl, Wuming left a message and took the 5 of them back to Uruk through the portal. Oh. Once again, we reached our destination in an instant. Gadotzi exclaimed in surprise. No matter when I see it, Senior Villo's ability is always so magical. Matthew seemed to be enjoying himself. BZZT, BZZT, BZZT. Every time you enter this strange space, the connection between you and Chaldea will become abnormal. BZZT, BZZT, BZZT. Roman's voice was heard from Gadotzi's bracelet along with the abnormal signal. Villo's ability is probably different from spatial magic and teleportation magic. It's not something that humans can use, so it's normal that Chaldea can't detect it. Even Merlin was very interested in Wuming's ability. If he didn't know that Wuming would be perfunctory, he would have asked him a long time ago. Anyway, it's better to be able to get to our destination as soon as possible. Anna sighed. She looked quite tired. She couldn't help it. She was only there to help, and after a long journey to the jungle in the southwest, she was left alone. Although she was the one who asked for it, after that, before she could see the Quetzalcoatl, and before she could do anything useful, she was picked up by Wuming and returned to Uruk. Anyone would be unhappy if they were in her shoes. Ma. Anna, don't be sad. Returning to Uruk means that you can eat delicious butter cake for dinner. Merlin, who thought he was showing a kind big brother smile, looked at Anna as if she was a kidnapper. Gadotzi and Matthew couldn't help but protect Anna behind them, watching Merlin with vigilance. You look very suspicious, Merlin. Mr. Merlin, please behave yourself. The two were like parents protecting their child, and they mocked Merlin with disdain. This made Merlin feel quite hurt. You are being disdained, Merlin. Wuming also joined in. Ma. Merlin didn't know what to say. He could only smile and shrug his shoulders. After a few seconds of silence, everyone couldn't help but burst into laughter. It's important to be able to maintain a happy mood in the singularity, but you guys shouldn't always bully Merlin, because I always feel the same way. This was the speech of Roman from Chaldea, who was given a pessimist, a coward, and other negative titles by a large number of servants. Ha! What is this speech of a soft-footed shrimp that does not know how to read the atmosphere, said Ishtar, in a rare moment. After all, after being taught a lesson by Wuming, Ishtar didn't speak again, or rather, she didn't dare to speak again. However, when Ishtar opened her mouth, she was still annoyed. By the way, what's the matter with the tent? There were no tents in Mesopotamia before I left. Wuming suddenly remembered the temporary residences that Nuwakamara commanded the soldiers to build before. Those residences were all tents, which gave people the feeling of a military camp. After all, Mesopotamia was made of clay, and the materials and cloth needed for tents were still scarce. However, if Gilgamesh wanted to, he could definitely invent such a thing. But even if there was, most of the tents would be replaced with sheepskin. However, that would be a little bit extravagant, and it might not make ends meet. That was why there were no tents in Mesopotamia. About that, I heard that it was an invention brought by Zhuge Kongming's military advisor. Matthew heard some rumors about it. Some people said that it was contributed by the king's military advisor. In other words, the main consciousness of Zhuge Kongming is Ermero too. Gadotzi was stunned. If the other party brought an item that didn't exist in this era, then why couldn't they determine the other party's background before? No, it's hard to say. Zhuge Kongming also had tents during the Three Kingdoms period. After all, the army needed to be stationed when marching to war. Wu Ming thought of such a possibility. If you think about it carefully, it really doesn't look like something like a modern tent. Matthew nodded. Moreover, in Matthew's opinion, whether it was Ermero II or Zhuge Kongming who was the main consciousness, both of them could do this. After all, no matter who was the main consciousness, both of them had knowledge about military tents. Both of them could use their professional skills to create military tents, which were convenient places to live in the wild. It was better to teach a man how to fish than to give him a fish. After making a sample, the construction method would be taught to the soldiers, and then all they needed to do was mass-produce the materials. What is the background of that person? Merlin must know, but he didn't tell us. What a disappointment. Gadotzi let out a sad cry and looked at Merlin with complaining eyes. After all, if Merlin told the truth, they wouldn't be so concerned. Ha ha ha. Don't worry, it's best to find out for yourself. And we'll be able to see the other party soon, so there's no need to rush. Merlin was still thick-skinned. Sure enough, Merlin is terrible. As expected of Anna, her words were still so sharp. As if ignoring Roman, the few of them chatted as they slowly walked towards the divine pagoda. Only Roman, who was in Chaldea, looked like he couldn't be revived. So I've been ignored. After that, Leonardo da Vinci, who was drinking coffee, smiled helplessly. You have to pull yourself together, Romani. You have to eat your own fruit. Although Leonardo da Vinci's eyes were overflowing with joy. Yes, while Roman was being comforted by Leonardo da Vinci, because the location of the portal was very close to the Tower of God, Wu Ming and the others had already stepped into the Tower of God. The soldiers they met along the way all showed surprise and respect to Wu Ming and Ishtar, but after seeing that the two brought people from the Chaldean embassy, they were worried that their greetings would delay the other party's important matters, so the soldiers didn't say anything to Wu Ming and Ishtar. However, they also bowed respectfully to Wu Ming and Ishtar before they obediently left. Sure enough, assassin as a Hyunryong is very popular in the Uruk. After another soldier silently left, Gadotzi suddenly spoke. After all, I'm a Uruk Hyunryong, and I'm completely different from Ishtar when I'm a god. I've always taken care of the humans. Seems like that's true. Matthew recalled the situation just now. The soldiers were indeed very respectful to Wu Ming and Ishtar, but the way they looked at the two of them was different. They were respectful and grateful to Wu Ming from the bottom of their hearts, but when the soldiers looked at Ishtar, it was as if they were looking at a high and mighty god who could not be offended. Although both were respectful, they were actually not the same. Ahem. But, I can see that the Uruk soldiers also respect you, Miss Ishtar, Matthew immediately added after being pushed by Gadotzi. However, this could not cover up the fact that even Ishtar had to admit. However, this fact made Ishtar even angrier. So what if it's different? I don't need their respect anyway. The humans only need to offer me gems and gold, humph. Ishtar said as she sped up and walked toward the room at the top where Gilgamesh was dealing with matters. This made everyone feel ashamed. Don't worry about her. She'll be fine after a while. Let's go. The place where Gil is dealing with matters is right in front of us. According to the current situation of this world, he should be staying there forever. When they arrived at the door at the top of the divine tower, the soldiers guarding the door were shocked when they saw Wu Ming and Ishtar. They immediately knelt down respectfully. Lord Hyunryong. Lord Ishtar. Welcome back to the Uruk. Wu Ming had indeed left because of the battle with Gorgon, and Ishtar had left the Uruk because she was always running around. She was often not in the Uruk. In short, the two of them were indeed welcome back. Is the king inside? Wuming asked the two soldiers who stood up. Yes, Lord Hyunryong. King Gilgamesh is dealing with matters. Lord Siduri and Lord Baiching are also inside. However, this was just a routine inquiry. After all, the door was so big that Wuming had already seen the situation inside. Gilgamesh sat on the throne, constantly picking up and putting down the slate and quickly dealing with matters. Siduri stood beside Gilgamesh to help record things. As for Musasobo Benkei, he stood under the throne with his eyes closed, waiting quietly. Let's go. Wuming said as he took the lead and walked into the room at the top of the divine tower where Gilgamesh dealt with government affairs. Chapter 931. On the king's throne, Gilgamesh, assisted by Siduri, was efficiently handling the various matters on the clay tablets. Oh, Hyunryong, you're back. Even when he saw that the visitor was Wuming, Gilgamesh didn't put down the clay tablet in his hand. Instead, he looked at the clay tablet while chatting with Wuming. Siduri slightly bowed to Wuming and Ishtar. She couldn't interrupt the conversation between the king and the god at this moment. Moreover, she still needed to classify the clay tablets that Gilgamesh processed, so she couldn't get away for a while. After all, I was tricked by Gorgon. How can I not come back? Wuming responded to Gilgamesh with a gentle smile. Ah, yes, it's not in your character to not respond to Gorgon. Gilgamesh put down the clay tablet in his hand. This was the last one that needed to be processed. Afterward, Gilgamesh raised his head and looked at Wuming, one high and one low, and smiled. If people who didn't know saw this scene, they would probably think that this was a beautiful scene of the king and his subjects having a heart-to-heart talk. However, Gadotsi felt that something was wrong. It was as if Gorgon, who Wuming and Gilgamesh were thinking about, was going to be in big trouble. Then, Gilgamesh looked at Siduri, who had already sorted the clay tablets. Siduri, pass the processed clay tablets to the various departments. Yes, King, I'll do it right away. After Siduri bowed, she and the guards ran down from the king's throne with a portion of the clay tablets. Just when she passed by Wuming and Ishtar, Siduri paused again and bowed to the two of them. Unlike Gilgamesh, Siduri still respected the gods, especially the Uruk Hyunryong and the Uruk city god Ishtar. Oh, isn't this the stupid goddess who ran away from home? How did you know to come back today? Gilgamesh tilted his body and supported his chin with one hand as if he had just noticed Ishtar. His tone was full of sarcasm. Ishtar would definitely explode if she heard Gilgamesh's words, but Wuming glared at Ishtar, indicating that she shouldn't mess around and stay put. Ah, like a powder keg that had expanded to the limit but couldn't explode, Ishtar pouted, clasped her hands, and turned her head away. There was even a faint mist above her head. Oh, looks like you've trained this stupid goddess well, Hyunryong. Gilgamesh was surprised by Ishtar's forbearance. Although he didn't show it on his face, Gilgamesh was actually very surprised. After all, anyone who knew Ishtar knew that she and Gilgamesh were the most incompatible. Even Wuming's relationship with Ishtar was better than Gilgamesh's relationship with Ishtar. But in the face of Gilgamesh's sarcasm and ridicule, Ishtar actually endured it. If it weren't for the fact that Ishtar's divinity in front of him really belonged to Ishtar, Gilgamesh would have thought that someone was pretending to be Ishtar. I just used some small tricks, King. I think if it were you, you would have guessed my tricks even if I tried to hide them. In an instant, Gilgamesh understood what Wuming meant by tricks. It was nothing more than starting with Ishtar's weakness, probably using money to coerce her. That was indeed the case. When Ishtar knew that she would be forced by Wuming to follow him to the Uruk, Ishtar cursed Wuming and all kinds of rumors and slanders blurted out. Although it wasn't to an amazing extent, after Gadotsi, Matthew, and others heard it, it could be said that it changed the image of Ishtar in their hearts. After that, Wuming briefly separated Ishtar from the crowd in the southwest jungle. During this period, Wuming said something to Ishtar. "If you can listen to me obediently and keep your mouth shut, I will fight for 1/10 of the Babylon treasury for you as your reward." This made Ishtar's eyes suddenly shine, but Wuming's request was not that simple. "Of course, if you can hold back when facing Gil, I will fight for 1/10 of the Babylon treasury for you as an additional reward. However, if you don't listen to me and can't hold back, all these rewards will be cancelled, and your original rewards will be reduced by half." The first half of the sentence made Ishtar's eyes shine even brighter, but the second half of the sentence made Ishtar's eyes shine even brighter. Ishtar began to calculate in her heart. If everything went well, she could finally get 25% of the treasures in the Babylon treasury, which was 1/4. However, if it didn't go well, she could only get less than 10% of the treasures, which was directly reduced from 1/4 to 1/20. It's easy, right? Just don't lose your temper and be obedient, and you will have a chance to get 25% of the treasures in the Babylon treasury. If you lose your temper and don't listen to me, you will only be left with 5% of the treasures. Although 5% of the treasures is indeed a lot, it is not even 10%. TSK. Wuming's words echoed around Ishtar, whose eyes began to spin. Gradually, Ishtar, who could not resist the temptation, chose to fall into the devil's trap. Ishtar covered her head, and her eyes were downcast as she finally made the final decision. "Ah! I know. I will be obedient." The power of money once again played its role. In short, Gilgamesh's guess was not far from the truth. Gadotsi and the others thought that Ishtar had become so obedient because of the influence of the force contract. Who would have thought that Wuming would still use money and treasures to make Ishtar choose to compromise? This king is so happy today. This king will not pursue the crime of abducting Chaldea that this king sent to support the Quetzalcoatl. Gilgamesh could not help but look at the Chaldea led by Gadotsi. Although they were Chaldea, only Gadotsi and Matthew could be considered as Chaldea's people. Anna was brought by Merlin, and Merlin was only sent by Gilgamesh to support Gadotsi and Matthew. Although Olga Marie and her vampire follower Parmelia had completed their seclusion at the end of the previous singularity, according to Roman's explanation, the Holy Grail that sealed the entire concept of Florence underwent a mutation. Something followed the demon god pillar Florence and groped its way to Chaldea. Chapter 932. Although Chaldea was located in the Antarctic continent, other than Chaldea, all other places were burned by Gidea. Therefore, Chaldea, which survived under the influence of the magnetic field, could be said to be an alternative singularity. When everyone in the world is crazy, and only one person is sober, the one who is sober is the crazy one. That was more or less the case. When the whole world was burned by Gidea, Chaldea, which was lucky enough to survive, became an existence similar to a singularity. To put it simply, Chaldea could no longer be regarded as an institution that still existed in the Antarctic continent. Chaldea should be treated as an existence similar to other singularities. Therefore, if someone wanted to invade Chaldea, they must first find Chaldea. However, this was full of difficulties. The reason why Chaldea was able to discover singularities was because Chaldea had 3 important things. Earth Environment Model, Chaldea Yas Near Future Observation Lens, Sheba Psychic Calculation Device, Trismegistes. With the cooperation of the 3 singularities could be discovered, and through Chaldea's psychic transfer technology, human masters could be sent to various eras. If one wanted to discover the location of Chaldea, they probably didn't need to go through so much trouble. However, Chaldea wasn't easy to discover either. However, probably because Chaldea took in Floros, who was sealed in the Golden Holy Grail by Wuming, some unknown existence used this as a medium to discover Chaldea. Currently, it was on its way to Chaldea. The existence in a certain location was probably Gidea. Wuming thought so. However, Wuming thought that this was impossible. Floros was sealed by his own power, coupled with the influence of Chaldea's magnetic field, it was impossible for Gaia to discover him. Unless Gaia had become even more powerful, she would be able to find the current location of Flawless through her previous relationship with him. Fortunately, because Chaldea's equipment was quite advanced, they discovered it in time. After that, Olga Marie used her half-mature third method to cooperate with her vampire follower, Parmelia, to add an additional layer of seal to the Holy Grail that sealed Floros, preventing the unknown existence from advancing. However, the price was that Olga Marie and Parmelia couldn't leave the golden Holy Grail that sealed Floros for the time being. Therefore, Roman was still the commander, and Parmelia couldn't go to the Singularity in Mesopotamia with Gadotsi and Matthew. However, if Olga Marie was the commander in Chaldea, there was a high chance that she would quarrel with Gilgamesh. After all, with Olga Marie's temper, how could she tolerate Gilgamesh making Gadotsi and Matthew spend so much time doing odd jobs? Fortunately, Roman was the temporary commander. After all, Roman's personality was more gentle. For example, at this moment, Roman, who was monitoring in Chaldea, was in a mess because of Gilgamesh's speech. What should we do? Leonardo da Vinci. I guess that King Gilgamesh would be angry. On the contrary, Leonardo da Vinci was quite calm. Isn't the Villo still with Tachika and the others? Don't worry, Wuming wouldn't let Gadotsi and Matthew be punished, but in fact, Gilgamesh had no intention of punishing the two at all. However, he still had to say what needed to be said. Wuming walked in front of Gadotsi and Matthew and looked at Gilgamesh defensively. I was the one who made them change their plan, and they also had a part to play in getting Ishtar to join us. Yes, this can be considered as making up for their mistakes. Merlin also stood beside Gadotsi and the others and said something good. Hey, although Ishtar is a stupid goddess, she is still somewhat useful. However, it is true that she has violated this king's will, and Hyunryong was the one who instigated her to do so. Logically speaking, she should be guilty of the same crime. Hearing this, Ishtar, whose back was facing Gilgamesh, tried her best to hold back her anger. In the end, she couldn't stand it anymore and said, I'm going out for a walk, Uruk. Don't worry about me. Then she flew away. You stupid goddess. Gilgamesh's anger was completely understandable. That's right, Ishtar summoned the horse Anna to break through the ceiling again. This king will remember it on your head, Hyunryong. Gilgamesh stared at Wuming with annoyance. However, this king will not delay the proper business. That will be your punishment. In fact, Gilgamesh often used his clairvoyance to see things when he took a short break. Coincidentally, Gilgamesh inadvertently saw the matter between Wuming and Gadotsi and the others. Therefore, Gilgamesh knew very well that Gadotsi and Matthew did not actually see the contents of the slate that he asked the small pterosaur to send to the south. In fact, Gilgamesh only wanted to train Gadotsi and Matthew. After all, the two of them were really immature and needed more training. Gilgamesh once heard from Merlin that Gadotsi and Matthew had received a lot of help from Wuming along the way. The two of them missed a lot of opportunities to train. Although this did make the path they took less difficult, Gilgamesh would make up for the lack of training along the way in his Uruk for Gadotsi and Matthew. It is true that you did not follow this king's orders. Now, listen to this king of Chaldea. Gilgamesh's voice suddenly became louder, which made Gadotsi and Matthew straighten their backs. It seemed that they were going to be punished. Yes. Gadotsi and Matthew responded in unison. You have indeed made a certain contribution in welcoming back the Uruk god, but you did not have the slightest effect on stopping the demonic beasts that crossed over the northwest mountains. Therefore, your merits cannot offset your faults. Siduri will arrange a new task for you later. Now, go back to your Chaldean embassy and rest. Gadotsi and Matthew, who originally thought that they would be severely punished by Gilgamesh, were stunned. The punishment given by Gilgamesh was probably quite mild. Is there a problem? Seeing the two stunned, Gilgamesh looked down at them with his scarlet eyes. This cold and harsh gaze made Gadotsi and Matthew come back to their senses. Yes. No problem. Gilgamesh nodded with satisfaction, then looked at Merlin and Anna. Merlin, this king does not want to comment on your dereliction of duty. You will be punished the same as Chaldea. As for Anna, that's it. You may leave. Chapter 933. Yes, thank you, King Gilgamesh, for your magnanimity. Merlin bowed to Gilgamesh with his cane, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stood aside and waited quietly. Anna didn't speak. She just bowed slightly to Gilgamesh, then left the throne room. She was just a follower, abducted by Merlin. It was only because of the agreement with Merlin that Anna obediently stayed in Uruk. And Gilgamesh also recognized Anna's identity. Therefore, the bow to Gilgamesh was just for show. More importantly, compared to the throne room, which was filled with the unique aura of clay tablets, she preferred the flower shop owned by a kind old lady in Uruk. Not only because of the fragrance of the flower shop, but also because Anna felt warmth in the flower shop. At this time, Matthew stood up and asked. That, King Gilgamesh, v. Hyunryong, where is Sir? Is he not with us? It seemed that Matthew was still a little unaccustomed to Wu Ming's name in this singularity. Gadotsi was also concerned about Wu Ming's punishment. After all, only Wu Ming wasn't punished or ordered by Gilgamesh. How could she rest assured? This king and Hyunryong have other important matters to discuss. You don't have to ask. However, immediately afterward, Merlin leaned over to Gadotsi and Matthew and whispered. Ignoring Merlin's actions, Gilgamesh turned his head and looked at Musasobo Benkei, who stood aside without saying a word. Also, Lakhnar, Musasobo Benkei, who was silent and seemingly inconspicuous, responded to Gilgamesh. Yes, King Gilgamesh, Lakhnar Musasobo Benkei is here. With one hand on the razor, Musasobo Benkei knelt on one knee in front of Gilgamesh. As you can see, Hyunryong and others have resolved the crisis in the northwest and returned to Uruk. You can rest assured. Yes, King Gilgamesh. Musasobo Benkei looked a little absent-minded. With the strength of his legs, Musasobo Benkei quickly returned to the Uruk to report to Gilgamesh. However, when Musasobo Benkei met with Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh calmly told Musasobo Benkei not to worry. Hyunryong and Ishtar have already resolved it. You just wait here. After Gilgamesh left such a sentence, Musasobo Benkei was left in the throne of the God Tower by Gilgamesh. This made Musasobo Benkei feel quite conflicted. As for what he was conflicted about, to be honest, Musasobo Benkei didn't know himself. Ever since he escaped from Operation Decapitation, Musasobo Benkei felt a little lost in his heart. Musasobo Benkei feared that history would repeat itself. Although he did save Nuwakamaru, that was only because Nuwakamaru was close to him. As a subject, he couldn't watch Nuwakamaru die at such a close distance. However, in other words, if the distance was far, perhaps Musasobo Benkei would abandon Nuwakamaru and escape alone, just like Lord Haifeng of Changlu who abandoned the Minamoto Sutra and escaped. He didn't want to see that scene and didn't want history to repeat itself. However, he was indeed afraid of facing the demonic beast commander. Regarding this, Musasobo Benkei was confused. Gilgamesh, who saw Musasobo Benkei's confusion, lost interest in Musasobo Benkei. No matter what, a soldier could only be called a qualified soldier if he was undistracted. The Uruk soldiers were full of faith in fighting against the demonic beasts and protecting their families. As for Musasobo Benkei, although he was stronger than the Uruk soldiers, his heart was not firm. Gilgamesh definitely wouldn't use such a person. If he gave an important mission to him, it would definitely ruin things in the end. Moreover, the risk brought by Musasobo Benkei's confusion was far more than that. At present, it was just that there was no fuse. If there was a fuse, the impact of the explosion would make Musasobo Benkei leave the Uruk silently like a walking corpse. Although he would eventually recover as a heroic spirit, the danger brought by the demonic beasts was too dangerous. The lack of any combat power would put the human side at a disadvantage. Therefore, Gilgamesh couldn't leave Musasobo Benkei alone. Keeping Musasobo Benkei was the temporary solution to deal with this unstable factor. Speaking of unstable factors, Ibaraki Boy, who escaped and occupied the mountain, was also one of them. 3 months ago, Ibaraki Boy was among the 10 servants who carried out the beheading operation. Gilgamesh couldn't help but recall the situation at that time. Because the situation at that time was very bad, after one of the demonic beast commanders, Mu Xiao and Hu Xiao, attacked the Uruk, and Okita Soki's spiritual base collapsed and left, Gilgamesh immediately planned the beheading operation against the demonic beast commander. He summoned servants to form an assassination team to assassinate the demonic beast commander. The strength of the servants only needed to be able to get close to and kill the demonic beast commander, because this was a group of suicide squad. And Gilgamesh's suicide squad certainly couldn't let go of Ibaraki Boy, who was still occupying the mountain. Therefore, Gilgamesh summoned 7 new servants early in the morning and let Shiro Amakusa lead the team to carry out the plan to kill Ibaraki Boy. Ibaraki Boy was a super unstable factor. Even if he didn't join the suicide squad as a consumable, he couldn't be left alive and must be eliminated. And Shiro Amakusa and the others, because Zhuge Kongming followed them, plus the strength of the servants, they directly captured Ibaraki Boy and brought him back to the Uruk. After setting a curse on Ibaraki Boy's spiritual base that could make it explode, Ibaraki Boy naturally entered the suicide squad and carried out the beheading operation. This was probably what was meant by waste. By the way, during the beheading operation, Ibaraki Boy was in the same team as Ba Yuzin and Shiro Amakusa. After all, even if the curse was used to threaten Ibaraki Boy's spiritual base, it couldn't be considered that everything was fine. Ibaraki Boy was a berserker. Therefore, Ibaraki Boy formed a team with 2 rather steady people. Those 2 people were Ba Yuzin and Shiro Amakusa. However, even if there were 2 steady people watching over Ibaraki Boy still made a mess in the end. Ba Yuzin and one of the demonic beast commanders, the Scorpion Man Katabliru, died together. Chapter 934. Because of Ibaraki Dojo's mischief, the Scorpion Man Katabliru used his stinger to hit Ba Yuchen, causing Ba Yuchen to be seriously injured. Ba Yuchen knew that his spirit core had been destroyed, so he decided to take Katabliru down with him. As for Ibaraki Dojo, Shiro Amakusa definitely wouldn't let him go. Although the servants who carried out the decapitation operation didn't think of returning to Uruk alive, killing a few more demonic beast commanders was good. In the end, because of Ibaraki Dojo's influence, Ba Yuchen had no choice but to take Ibaraki Dojo down with him. If it wasn't for the insurance method engraved on Ibaraki Dojo's spirit core exploding to cover for Shiro Amakusa, allowing Shiro Amakusa to take the opportunity to escape from the demonic beast horde, he probably wouldn't have been able to escape. Again, they were a suicide squad. After agreeing to Gilgamesh's plan, the servants who carried out the decapitation operation had already disregarded life and death. The reason why Shiro Amakusa cherished his life so much was because he had to do his best to kill as many demonic beast commanders as possible. Everything was for the sake of humanity. It turned out that the servants were worthy of being called heroes in human history. Yagyu, one of the strongest swordsmen in the Jianghu era, Musho, Zongmo, and the ancestor of martial arts in the East, Kasalaku, worked together to kill Kasalaku, who had great brute strength. However, the 2 of them were also seriously injured. Extreme strength could overwhelm all techniques, and that was what Kasalaku did. Although the 2 spirit cores were intact, their spirit cores were completely destroyed. They were completely defeated by the remaining demonic beasts. Fuma Kotaro and Kata Duanzo, who were also wind demon ninjas, used ninjutsu to deal with the formless Omudaburotu, who was known as the Tempest. However, with the help of Shiro Amakusa, the three of them managed to kill Omudaburotu by taking him down with them. However, although the servants were killing one by one, the demonic beast commanders weren't that easy to kill. Even with Zhuge Kongming's plan, which scattered the demonic beast commanders one by one, and catching them off guard, the servants still managed to kill the demonic beast commanders by taking them down with them. However, at this time, the other demonic beast commanders finally discovered the problem. So, the demonic beast commanders began to surround the remaining servants and surround them, preparing to annihilate them in one fell swoop. At that time, through the connection between Gilgamesh and the servants, Gilgamesh remotely received the news that several demonic beast commanders were successfully killed, but at the same time, he lost contact with those servants. No one knew what Gilgamesh was thinking at that time. He was still dealing with government affairs. Gilgamesh knew very well that the servants he sent out had no ability to break through the encirclement of countless demonic beasts. Even if they could break through the encirclement, they would still be hunted down by the demonic beasts. There was no way they would be able to return to the North Wall in time. And Gilgamesh wouldn't deploy a large number of soldiers to support a few servants because it was likely that a large number of soldiers would be sacrificed. However, because the strength of these servants was not enough, Gilgamesh could maintain so many servants at one time. If they were like Wu Ming, the amount of servants he provided would be more than enough for Gilgamesh to go to the underworld. However, although Gilgamesh's heart was heavy, he didn't regret it. The so-called heroic spirits were existences that fought for the future of humanity. They were existences that risked everything for the sake of humanity. The so-called Suicide Squad proved this point. It was precisely because they understood that they would not be able to return that the servants agreed to form a Suicide Squad. Fortunately, Gadotsi and the others came late. If they came early, perhaps they wouldn't have allowed such a thing to happen. After all, whether it was Gadotsi or Matthew, they were quite emotional people. However, it was precisely because of such human beings that the servants rushed into the demonic beasts without hesitation. Glancing at Gadotsi and Matthew, who continued to whisper to Merlin, Gilgamesh showed a puzzled look. After returning to his senses, Gilgamesh looked at Musasobo Benkei again. The fact that Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamara could survive was also within Gilgamesh's expectation. He saw it through his clairvoyance. Berserker Darius III, who teamed up with Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamara, was accidentally discovered by the demonic beast commander. Nuwakamara wanted to kill the demonic beast commander recklessly. Musasobo Benkei had a fear of death, but because he was unwilling to abandon his former master in front of him to die again, he resolutely took Nuwakamara and fled the battlefield when Darius III couldn't hold on anymore. They successfully survived along the Tigris River. However, Nuwakamara, who survived, regained her fighting spirit. In order to make up for her failure, she continued to work hard under Gilgamesh to complete the tasks given to her by Gilgamesh. Since then, Musasobo Benkei had changed. To put it nicely, he had lost the motivation to continue fighting. To put it bluntly, he had become a soulless zombie. At this moment, Musasobo Benkei's expression was like this. Seeing this scene, Gilgamesh couldn't help but frown. But this doesn't mean that this king doesn't need to set up a stronghold in the northwest. Set off immediately and return to the temporary stronghold in the northwest. Rendezvous with Ryder and wait for this king's subsequent orders. Sure enough, Gilgamesh couldn't stand such an expression. It was too disgusting. A hero who left his name in human history should look like a hero. Yes, King Gilgamesh, Musasobo Benkei replied, then left the tower without stopping. Then, Gilgamesh looked at Merlin, Gadotsi, and Matthew, who were still muttering non-stop. What are you muttering about? Return to the Chaldean embassy and rest as soon as possible. Yes then, King, I'll take my leave first. But Tachika and Matthew seem to have something to discuss with you and Lord Hyunryong. I won't disturb you. Merlin finished speaking and left by himself. Is that so? Gilgamesh looked at Gadotsi and Matthew. Then, what else do you want? That. Gadotsi smiled awkwardly. What was there to discuss? Merlin clearly said that he could see Zhuge Kongming if he stayed, but in the end, he sold her and Matthew out. Why don't we let Tachika follow? After all, she is Chaldea's ambassador to Uruk. Wuming suggested half-jokingly. Some things could indeed involve Chaldea's people. Forget it. This king is in a good mood today. This king and Hyunryong are going somewhere. If you don't want to return to the Chaldean embassy to rest, you can choose to follow. Gadotsi and Matthew's eyes lit up. If Merlin was right, they should be able to see Zhuge Kongming next. Yes, King Gilgamesh. It would be our pleasure. Chapter 935. After Gilgamesh finished speaking, he walked down from the throne and walked straight to the door. Hurry up and catch up. This king won't be responsible if you fall behind. Let's go. Wuming patted Gadotsi and Matthew's shoulders and smiled. Don't be fooled by Gil's words. If we really don't catch up, he won't care about us. Even if it was Wuming, the result would be the same. Gilgamesh was a man of his words. Isn't that bad? Matthew had a new understanding of King Gilgamesh's willfulness. But Gil will definitely slow down and pretend to wait for us. He has changed from the arrogant hero king to the existent sitting on the throne of the king of men. Gilgamesh is now a veritable sage king. Wuming praised Gilgamesh in a disguised way. Idiot, don't talk too much. Hurry up and catch up. This king won't slow down. Yes. We'll catch up. Gadotsi and Matthew ran toward the exit in a panic. Wuming smiled helplessly, shrugged his shoulders, and followed. Just like that, the last person left the throne room. The empty throne room was illuminated by the rays of the setting sun, making it look exceptionally beautiful. Gilgamesh walked out of the tower, but he didn't go directly to the main road. Instead, he went around to the back of the tower and gently pressed somewhere at the bottom of the tower. A stone wall protruded and slowly rose like a stone door. A dim passage appeared in front of Gilgamesh. Without the slightest hesitation, Gilgamesh stepped inside. However, Gadotsi and Matthew, who followed Gilgamesh, were a little confused. They had been in Uruk for a while, but it was the first time they saw such a place. Was it an important institution? Although Gadotsi and Matthew didn't recognize it, Wuming recognized it. I see. No wonder you didn't see Zhuge Kongming. He's probably here, Wuming explained as he walked behind Gadotsi and Matthew. In here. The two were stunned when they heard Wuming's words. So there was such a secret room in Mesopotamia. However, this isn't a secret room. How do I explain this? Anyway, you'll know when you go in. Wuming spread his hands and walked to the stone door that was still open. By the way, this is the passage to the place where I used to live, Wuming said as he pointed to the passage behind the stone door. The passage to the place where you used to live. The two were a little confused. I'll explain as we walk. The stone door will automatically close if we delay for too long, Wuming said as he walked into the passage. Oh. It's semi-automatic. Gadotsi sighed. At that moment, the stone door made a sound of friction and swayed as it fell. It looked like it was about to close. Say. Senior. The stone door seems to be closing. Matthew was shocked. If this continued, they would probably be locked outside. Senior, I'm sorry. Matthew exclaimed as he grabbed Gadotsi's arm and ran toward the stone door. Well, Matthew, slow down. Matthew changed from holding Gadotsi with one hand to holding Gadotsi in his arms. He walked briskly to the half-closed stone door. With inertia, Matthew held Gadotsi and slid into the half-closed stone door. Then, the stone door happened to close completely. Great, Senior, we're in. Matthew first took a deep breath, then looked at Gadotsi in his arms. However, Gadotsi's state at the moment was very similar to the feeling of being squeezed by Matthew's chest. She looked a little dizzy. Say. Senior. Are you okay? Matthew grabbed Gadotsi's shoulder and shook desperately. Gadotsi immediately pressed Matthew's hand. I'm fine, Matthew, just a little dizzy. If Matthew continued to shake, it would not be as simple as dizziness. At this time, the passage that was dim because of the closed stone door suddenly lit up. Ha ha ha, sorry, actually I closed the stone door and startled you. After all, it was a passage leading to his former residence. The method of opening and closing was naturally in the hands of Wuming. The dragon horn on Wuming's head emitted a white light that was not dazzling, which was just enough to illuminate the surroundings. Gadotsi and Matthew both looked at Wuming silently, or rather, they stared at him and made an ambiguous sound. Wuming realized that his joke might have gone too far, and his face became serious. Ahem. I'm just urging you to hurry up. Okay, let's go, Gil is in front, we can't delay for too long. As Wuming said, he turned around with a face full of shame and began to walk down the passage. Gadotsi and Matthew were not that angry, so they followed Wuming closely. In order to divert their attention, Wuming began to talk about the origin of this passage. When I first came to the Uruk was still ruled by King Lugarbanda. As the god who protected the Uruk, I hid in a cave. I basically walked around with the dolls I made, or observed the entire Uruk through the statues in my temple. This passage leads to the cave where I hid. Vilo, senpai, why did you hide? Matthew was quite puzzled. The gods' generation was an era where humans and gods coexisted. It was reasonable to say that there was no need to hide. Also, even if you wanted to hide, why did you choose to hide in a cave? You were the god of Sumer at that time, right? This sentence was transmitted from Gadotsi's wristband, which was Roman speech in Chaldea. The reason I needed to hide was very simple. It was because I was injured at that time. As for why I hid in a cave, it was simply because I had no place to go. Although the first half of Wuming's sentence aroused everyone's curiosity, they could still understand it. However, the second half of the sentence attracted everyone's attention and puzzlement. No place to go. Gadotsi and Matthew did not understand what he meant. However, Roman, who was sitting in Chaldea's control room, seemed to have guessed something. He looked at Leonardo da Vinci beside him in disbelief, as if asking for confirmation. The genius Leonardo da Vinci naturally understood Roman's meaning and nodded, indicating that Roman should continue. The reason why there was no place to go, could it be that you are a foreign god? Chapter 936. A foreign god. Gadotsi paused for a moment. What did this mean? Doctor, are you saying that the Vilo Senior is not Sumer's native god? Wuming was not surprised by Roman's conjecture. After all, he did not intend to hide his identity as a foreign god. Let's not talk about anything else. Just the fact that he has multiple identities in history proves that the Vilo is not a simple existence. At the very least, he is not a native god. Sumer's native gods were born from faith. After the gods retreated, these gods also disappeared. Only Wuming, who was not a native god, could survive in other eras. Of course, it was only a possibility that he could survive in other eras. However, Wuming had left his shadow in many places in history. Cyrus, Sodric, Vilo Cyrus Ed, Hyunryong, even if he was a foreign god, once he accepted the natives' faith, it would still have a serious impact after the gods disappeared. However, Wuming acted as if nothing had happened and left traces in human history. Roman guessed that Wu Ming's traces probably existed in the modern era as well. It was just that they had not been discovered. After all, Wu Ming had personally admitted that he was not dead. That's right. Roman's analysis is correct. I am actually a foreign god. Wu Ming admitted it naturally. You really are a foreign god. Gadotsi thought it was a joke. Because I protected the Uruk, the humans of the Uruk and even Mesopotamia classified me as a Sumer god. Even so, the disappearance of the gods will not have much impact on me. When Wu Ming's power was insufficient in the past, he was restricted when he used his real body in the modern era. He had to be careful. However, now, Wu Ming did not have to be careful at all. This was because Wu Ming's status had reached the limit of the world. The world could no longer restrict Wu Ming. After all, Wu Ming was one step away from adulthood. However, this step could no longer rely on the accumulation of time. He had to find another way. Will Tachika hate me because I am a foreign god? Wu Ming suddenly turned around and looked at Gadotsi. However, this immediately received a response from Gudazi. How is that possible? Assassin is assassin. Is she a god or a human? Or does she have anything to do with a foreign god or a local god? Anyway, I've always liked assassin. Gadotsi had a baffled look on his face. However, Gadotsi's words stunned the innocent Matthew. His face couldn't help but blush. That. Senior, are you confessing to Senior Villo? Matthew asked embarrassedly. Wu Ming was also stunned. He felt that Gadotsi's love for him was not the kind of love between a man and a woman. It was more like the love between a brother and a sister. It's not a confession. If I have to say it, I feel that assassin is like a brother to me. Simply put, it's the love between a brother and a sister. Gadotsi also explained in a serious tone. Sure enough, Tachika, you think so too. Wu Ming sighed in relief. If he treated Gadotsi as a sister, and Gadotsi treated him as a love interest, wouldn't it be strange? Of course. Anyway, I don't know why, but I always feel close to assassin. This was the same for Wu Ming. Although the two had only met a few times, ever since Wu Ming met Gadotsi for the first time, he felt that Gadotsi was like a sister to him. He wanted to take care of her. Although Wu Ming didn't understand the reason, it didn't hinder the feelings between Wu Ming and Gadotsi. Gadotsi said with a smile. Then, she threw herself into Wu Ming's arms. The space in this passage isn't that big. Why are you making a fuss? Can't you be more obedient? Wu Ming's face was full of helplessness. Gadotsi responded to Wu Ming with a proud laugh. Hee, I won't. Seeing this scene, Matthew said with a blank face. Doctor, I'm a bit confused. As a follower and junior who accompanied Gadotsi all the way, Matthew could be said to be the one who understood Gadotsi the most. Senior Varen and Senior Varen aren't siblings, and their feelings for each other are beyond the brotherly love I've seen, but the way they look at each other doesn't seem to be the love between a man and a woman. I don't quite understand this kind of feeling. However, the doctor didn't respond. Doctor. Chaldea had to speak through Gadotsi's bracelet, but Chaldea didn't need to be close to receive the sound. It was precisely because of this that Gadotsi also realized that something was wrong. After leaving Wu Ming's arms, Gadotsi called Chaldea. Doctor. Doctor. However, there was still no response. Is the signal interfered again? Gadotsi couldn't help but guess. After all, the signal between the bracelet and Chaldea was often easily interfered with. This was also a drawback that Chaldea couldn't eliminate. It shouldn't be. Although my cave does have a barrier, it can't be interfered with before I get close. Wu Ming also made a judgment. However, at this moment, Gadotsi's bracelet finally made a sound, but it was Leonardo da Vinci's bracelet. Yes, this is your genius Leonardo da Vinci's bracelet. Student Romani has died in battle, and he was muttering, "It's more than brotherly love, but it's not love between a man and a woman. I don't understand such feelings. Damn it, I'm such a loser without family, friends, and lovers." Oh, by the way, Romani was crying. As a genius, Leonardo da Vinci could imitate him, but for the sake of this genius image, I refused. So the doctor is such a loser. Gadotsi couldn't help but laugh dryly. Ah. I thought the doctor was married. Matthew, who had seen Roman wearing a ring, didn't know what to say. "Roman, I won't talk about you for now, but Tachika, Matthew, Leonardo da Vinci, and the other surviving members of Chaldea, aren't they all your friends and family? You've been through life and death together, and you've been working hard to save the world. This is a situation where one wrong move will cause you to lose the whole game. Isn't that enough to prove this relationship?" Although the saying, "a friend in need is a friend indeed," seemed a little cliché, the meaning it expressed was not a cliché. No matter when, a friend in need could indeed reveal a friend in need, and Chaldea was currently doing so. After Wu Ming said this, Gadotsi, Matthew, and the rest of Chaldea fell into silence. Chapter 937. What's wrong? Wu Ming saw that everyone was silent, and for a moment, he was puzzled. Did he say something wrong? Villo-senpai, you're right. Matthew showed a relieved smile. That's right, everyone worked together to get through so many singularities. Without everyone, Matthew and I definitely wouldn't be able to do it, Gadotsi also said. It seems that even a genius like me can be slow. It seemed that Wu Ming was better than Leonardo da Vinci in some aspect, and Leonardo da Vinci's voice sounded quite distressed. And Chaldea's staff also started to discuss because of this sentence. Yes, because I've been nervous all this time, I've forgotten that we're partners who have gone through so many difficulties together. Indeed, although we're facing a world crisis, the relationship between everyone has become more intimate. That's right, to be able to go through the end of the world with everyone, whether we succeed or not, we've already become friends. What nonsense are you talking about? We'll definitely succeed. That's right, Fujimaru and Gillett have gone through so many singularities, we'll definitely succeed. But we can't slack off, only by doing our job can we be worthy of Fujimaru and Gillett's efforts. Oh. Everyone exchanged words one after another, and although they were chatting happily, the staff still didn't forget their work at hand, and even their morale rose for some reason. For a time, Chaldea's control room was still operating normally, but no matter how one looked at it, it was livelier, more lively, and more hopeful than before. And Roman, who was squatting and crying on the side, also recovered and walked to Leonardo da Vinci's side. At this time, Leonardo da Vinci also took the initiative to let Roman sit down. After adjusting his mentality, Roman spoke. "Oh, I can only say that you're worthy of being a historical hero and Lord God, you're more open-minded than us humans. Because of the impact of the burning of humanity, our nerves are indeed a little tense, in the end." Roman let out a long sigh and thanked Wu Ming sincerely. "Thank you." Whether it was Leonardo da Vinci, Gadotsi, or Matthew, all of them could tell that Roman was very grateful to Wu Ming. "Although it's not as serious as you make it out to be, you guys have indeed neglected it. Of course, Roman, if I had met you earlier, I think we would have definitely become friends. If that was the case, it would be hard to say if the current Roman would really have a fever. Whether or not Wu Ming could change the past Roman was another matter altogether. I think you can probably change me." For some reason, Roman seemed to be recalling something and fell into deep thought. "Forget it, let's talk about these things later. We have to hurry up and catch up with Gil. Don't let him wait too long. Even if he's not called a wise king, the king's temper is also erratic." Wu Ming's words surprised Gadotsi and Matthew. That's true. Matthew nodded. Yes, let's go quickly, I don't want to experience any more tests. it seems that Gadatsi's memory of the trial given by Gilgamesh was still fresh in her mind. Even if Gadatsi's view of the current Gilgamesh had changed, there was still a fear of Gilgamesh in her heart. Sure enough, when Gadatsi, Wuming, and Matthew caught up with Gilgamesh, Gadatsi's throat moved, and a nervous look appeared on her face. Gilgamesh, who was standing steadily in the middle of the passage with his back facing Wuming's trio, crossed his arms in front of his chest, and only spoke when he heard the movements of Wuming's trio. "Idiot! Too slow. This king is still waiting for you." I'm sorry, King Gilgamesh." Gadatsi and Matthew were obviously frightened, but Wuming seemed to have seen through something, and a teasing smile appeared on his face. "Ahem. Gil, if I remember correctly, there should be a fork in the road ahead." Although it was a very normal sentence, Wuming's tone gave people the feeling that he was teasing Gilgamesh. However, the response to Wuming was Gilgamesh's arrogant voice. "Humph. You don't have to deliberately provoke this king. Even if this king will work himself to death, he will not be senile. It's just that our destination this time is not the cave where you are hiding, but another place. This king is afraid that you will take Fumaru and the others the wrong way, so he specially waited for you here." Yes, this road was not a one-way road, there would be many forks in the road ahead. The extra roads were deliberately made by Wuming. In short, in order to make the right way to the cave where he was hiding not easily discovered, it was specially made under the divine tower, but it was useless. How could people who had the ability to find the stone door and come in be confused by these forks? If they could come in, if they were instructed by Wuming, they would naturally not go the wrong way, and if they came in with their own ability, it meant that the other party was a capable person, and naturally, they would not go the wrong way. Not to mention those who couldn't come in, these forks had no effect on them since they couldn't even come in. As for those who came in by mistake, no one would come in by mistake. Wuming would not make such a typical mistake. The stone door itself was set by Wuming to disperse the loon. Ordinary people couldn't even get close to it, let alone open the mechanism to enter the passage by chance. Therefore, these forks became superfluous. When these forks were made, the young Gilgamesh also persuaded Wuming not to do these useless things, but according to Wuming's words, there must be forks in the tunnel, and other people's secret passages are like this. In the end, Gilgamesh couldn't resist Wuming, so he let Wuming complete the passage mixed with forks. As a result, this place was like a maze. Regardless of whether he got lost or not, he was definitely annoyed. Wuming didn't expect Gilgamesh to forget the way. After all, Gilgamesh must have been here in the past 3 months. Just like Gilgamesh said, he wouldn't forget the way even if he worked himself to death. Wuming teased Gilgamesh mainly to liven up the atmosphere so that Gadatsi and Matthew wouldn't be so nervous. After this king's Uruk was attacked by the magical beasts last time, this king accidentally discovered an extra passage that you set up underground. So, this king took advantage of the situation and dug a new space at the end of this passage to meet the requirements of this king's military advisor. Chapter 938. Gilgamesh said as he walked. Gilgamesh walked in front, illuminated by the light emitted by the dragon horn headdress on Wuming's head. His long shadow spread out on the special stone floor in front of him, creating a clear shadow. In fact, Gilgamesh could see clearly in the dark passage even if there was no light, and so could Wuming, so there was no light in this passage. Today, because Gadatsi and Matthew followed, Wuming asked Kalas to light up the passage. He had to say that Kalas was really omnipotent in terms of support. Wuming didn't know whether Matthew could see clearly, but Wuming knew that Gadatsi, as an ordinary person, needed light. Without delay, Wuming followed Gilgamesh, and then asked Gilgamesh. Speaking of which, your military counselor is a pseudo-follower. Is his personality Zhuge Kong Ming, or the physical personality? Or is it like Ishtar's 3:7? Taking this opportunity, he could ask Gilgamesh the truth, and Gadatsi and Matthew were also quite interested in this. Oh, it seems that you have seen this king's military counselor before. We met him in Winterwood in Rome, but at that time, one was Zhuge Kongming, and the other was the physical personality Ermero too. Without Wuming, Gadotzi and Matthew met Ermero too, who acted as a king's military counselor, when they followed the fifth emperor of Rome, Nero, to fight against the enemy. This king's military counselor is Zhuge Kongming, not the physical personality Ermero too you have seen. After Gilgamesh finished answering, Wuming spoke again. So what does this Zhuge Kongming need? Is it an independent secret space? Then the cave I used to hide in is not impossible, why spend the effort to build another one? Wuming was quite puzzled. He needs an enclosed space where no one can disturb him to make his props, and your cave has a ventilation, so this king created such a space for him. Probably because he died in a tent with airflow when he was alive, Zhuge Kongming, who became a heroic spirit, was quite concerned about the enclosed space without airflow, especially the kind of enclosed space underground, which made Zhuge Kongming quite satisfied. Furthermore, the cave you once hid in belongs to you. This king will forever guard it for you. This king will not allow anyone to use it. This point is off the table. On this point, Gilgamesh still has his own insistence. Wuming naturally knew what Gilgamesh cared about. For Gilgamesh, the place where Wuming lived probably has a special meaning to Gilgamesh. Speaking of which, what's at the end of this path? It's just a dead end, there's nothing. Because of this, Gilgamesh built a new secret room at the end of this path. Is your memory getting bad because of your age? How can you forget something you did? Gilgamesh couldn't help but criticize Wuming. There's nothing I can do about it. I was just playing with it back then. Wuming turned his head to the side awkwardly. Speaking of which, what's at the end of the other paths? Are they also dead ends? Gadotzi was suddenly curious. They're all dead ends. Gilgamesh very simply and crudely replied. Indeed, Gil is right, they're all dead ends, however, Wuming added in his heart as if he was complaining. It was indeed a dead end. Other than the dead ends of the other paths, there were all kinds of runes, such as cursed flames, thunderbolts, and so on. Furthermore, they were all so dangerous that one would die if they were not careful. Basically, it was the kind of dead end that made it impossible to survive. Looking at Gadotzi's sudden realization, Wuming was sure that the dead end imagined by Gadotzi and the dead end mentioned by Gilgamesh were definitely not the same thing. Castor needs a magic workshop to make items. Mr. Kongming probably needs to build his own workshop, so he asked King Gilgamesh to help him build it. Matthew suddenly interjected. Exactly. Gilgamesh praised Matthew, which made Matthew a little proud. However, Wuming was not like Matthew who didn't know anything. Although Castor needs a magic workshop, the magic cast by Chinese heroes should be fundamentally different from the magic cast by other regions. Even if there is no workshop, Chinese servants can still exert their power. Although Wuming didn't know the meaning, Wuming knew that the Chinese caster was not like the magicians in other regions. Not only the method and name were different, but the essence was also different from the magic base used by other magicians. In other words, Chinese magicians didn't use magic base. Not to mention the Kanagi magicians for the time being, the magicians after the Kanagi magicians needed magic base to use magic. Although it seemed that magicians could easily perform magic by chanting a spell or drawing a circle, but magicians could only perform magic by connecting to the magic base of this world. The magic base could be imagined as a collection of a series of knowledge, ideas, and so on, and it basically existed in the land. Of course, if you think about Christianity, a world-famous religion, its magic base might be spread all over the world. Just like the Lune rune, there was also a magic base when it was used. When Wuming learned the Lune rune, he was a Kanagi, and Wuming was a mutant, so the magic base naturally couldn't restrict him, so Wuming only knew a little about it and didn't go too deep. The magic circuit was not only used to provide magical power, but it was also used to connect to the magic base. This was the most basic truth in the magic world, and basically, every magician would know it. However, Wu Ming, who glanced at Gadotzi, silently took back his sentence at this moment. He had to say that Gadotzi was really too bad as a magician, and in terms of temperament, Gadotzi was not suitable to be a magician at all. However, it was exactly because of Gadotzi's temperament that he could keep making connections with the clones of the heroic spirits who had unique personalities and unusual tempers, the servants. In short, although Wu Ming didn't have a deep understanding of these, Wu Ming knew that the magic used by the Chinese magicians was very different from the magic used in other places, so Wu Ming pointed out that Zhuge Kongming didn't need a magic workshop. Moreover, as the military advisor on the battlefield, Zhuge Kongming must have spent most of his time marching and fighting. Since that's the case, it's not surprising that he has a way to replace the workshop. Now that the magical beasts are wreaking havoc, I don't think that the military advisor needs a special workshop to make items. Wu Ming's eyes flashed with the light of speculation, although he looked at Gilgamesh. I'm afraid, Gil, you gave him some task. Chapter 939. What task was given? Looking at each other, Gadotzi and Matthew couldn't help but repeat. As expected of this king's teacher, Uruk Hyunryong, that's right. As you said, this king's military counselor doesn't need a special workshop. The reason why the military counselor needs a workshop is indeed because this king gave Zhuge Kongming a difficult task. Gilgamesh stopped abruptly as he finished speaking. We're here. Ha! So fast. Matthew showed a look of disbelief. They just walked for a short while, how did they arrive? With such a short distance, if they were on the ground, it was almost the market near the Holy Tower in Uruk City. No, Matthew, since you stepped into this fork, your speed has increased several times, but you didn't notice it. Roman saw it clearly through the instrument in Chaldea. The figures of Gadotzi and the others seemed to be moving forward at a high speed. It can be said that they were completely out of Uruk City. According to the instrument, your current position is somewhere near the north wall. Roman shouted in disbelief. How is that possible? We only walked a few steps. Gadotzi was also surprised. Is the instrument broken? What's going on? So annoying. Roman checked the instrument. But, King Gilgamesh also said that we have arrived, maybe we are really near the north wall. Matthew raised his small hand and expressed his opinion. So that's how it is. Roman stopped checking the equipment and nodded. I think it's probably some kind of magic trick with special effects set up in this underground passage. Since this was Kanzaki's underground labyrinth-like tunnel, the entire tunnel was filled with mana. That was why Roman didn't pay much attention to this mana. Now that he thought about it, it was highly likely that the mana was being emitted by some sort of special magic spell. At the very least, it was related. Roman's judgment is correct, this passage has an acceleration effect. Wu Ming gave the final answer. However, this was not set by Wu Ming, it was probably added by Gilgamesh later. Of course, don't forget that this king is now a magician. It's natural for him to use magic to make the passage more convenient. This place was quite a distance away from Uruk. If they were to rely on walking, they would not be able to reach their destination in a short period of time. Only by applying the acceleration effect to the entire passage could they reach their destination in such a short period of time. It only takes such a short time to go from Uruk to the North Wall. This is a great advantage for the North Wall. Matthew realized the problem. In a sense, this passage shortened the distance between the North Wall and Uruk to the extreme. In this way, whether it was support, marching, retreating, or other things, it could be done easily. This passage originally led to the north, and its end was near the North Wall. In the beginning, when Mu Xiao and Hu Xiao, one of the commanders of the demonic beasts, led the demonic beasts to sneak into the Uruk from underground, they also found this passage by accident and smoothly arrived near the Uruk. If not for this, the demonic beasts wouldn't have reached the Uruk that night. However, there were two sides to everything. Since the demonic beasts could use this passage to reach the Uruk, why couldn't humans use it? Gilgamesh simply transformed the end of the passage into Zhuge Kong Ming's magic workshop, which was connected to the barracks in the north wall. If there were no limitations, it would indeed be more convenient to support the north wall from Uruk. The limitation was the narrowness of the passage. Kalas, analyze it. Wuming put his hand on the wall and passed the magic to Kalas to achieve the effect of sampling. Master, the space here is too narrow. The magic attached to it can only work on a dozen people at most. If more people are added, I'm afraid it will exceed the capacity of the acceleration magic and the acceleration will be scrapped. Kalas' cold voice came from Wuming's head. It could be said that it scared Gadotsi and Matthew. Senior Villow's horn. Matthew was stunned. Talk. Gadotsi raised her finger and pointed at Wuming's head in surprise. By the way, Kalas didn't talk to you, but you have seen Kalas before. Wuming's words made Gadotsi fall into deep thought. Have we seen her before? In addition to this peculiarity, Gadotsi couldn't remember when Wuming had a horn on his head. When we first met, the black hat I was wearing was actually another form of Kalas. After hearing Wuming's words, Gadotsi suddenly recalled the first time she and Wuming met. That memory was still fresh in Gadotsi's mind. So it's that black hat. Gadotsi suddenly shouted, as if she had just woken up from a dream. Senpai, you are too rude. Mashu was a little embarrassed as she poked Gadotsi. Gadotsi, who realized that she was indeed a little rude, scratched the back of her head. Hey. I'm sorry. However, Kalas didn't pay attention to Gadotsi and Matthew at all. It was precisely because Kalas didn't talk to anyone other than Wuming that Gadotsi and Matthew didn't remember Kalas. Oh, it turned out to be a high-level magic costume. When did you get this? This king doesn't have any impression of it. Gilgamesh saw the nature of Kalas at a glance. When he saw the dragon horn on Wuming's head, Gilgamesh knew that it was a magic costume, but Gilgamesh didn't expect Wuming's magic costume to be so intelligent. It was definitely a high-level magic costume. Kalas was made by the second magician in the future. Although it is a simple auxiliary magic costume, Kalas is almost omnipotent except for combat. What? The second magician made it. This time it was Roman's turn to be surprised. Sure enough, Roman should have thought of this earlier. An attire that was similar to an artificial intelligence and could instantly analyze the magic within the passage was undoubtedly the highest level of magic attire. Perhaps only an existence at the level of a mage would be able to create something like this. However, before Roman could recover from his shock, a voice that was supposed to be very pleasant to the ear emitted a strong fighting spirit at this moment. Oh, I seem to have heard someone mention omnipotence. Chapter 940. It's Leonardo da Vinci's voice. However, Matthew's words were full of worry. After all, although Leonardo da Vinci's voice was still pleasant to the ears, when Leonardo da Vinci's voice entered Matthew's ears, Matthew had a bad feeling. It's probably Leonardo da Vinci's jealousy again. It's not the first time. Gadotsi whispered to Matthew. After spending so many days together from Winterwood to Mesopotamia, Gadotsi understood Leonardo da Vinci. Whenever other people involved Leonardo da Vinci's expertise, Leonardo da Vinci would become unusually unique. For example, Wuming's omnipotence just now. For Leonardo da Vinci, who had the title of omnipotent, this could be said to be a blatant provocation, and it was a top-notch provocation. Leonardo da Vinci was talented in painting, music, sculpting, mathematics, astronomy, geometry, biology, physics, engineering, invention of props, creation of weapons, and many other fields. Furthermore, he had outstanding achievements in all of them. Furthermore, such an omnipotent person had quite a bit of talent in magic as well. If someone provoked Leonardo da Vinci in the aspect of counterfeiting, then Leonardo da Vinci would discuss with the other party on who is the real product. If someone provoked Leonardo da Vinci in the aspect of art, then Leonardo da Vinci would discuss with the other party on who is the real artist. If someone provoked Leonardo da Vinci in the aspect of invention and construction, then Leonardo da Vinci would discuss with the other party on who is the real inventor. Although it seemed like he was going to use violence, Leonardo da Vinci was against violence. However, if he accidentally used violence, Leonardo da Vinci would not reflect on it. Wu Ming's words just now included all these aspects, which could be said to be an unprecedented provocation for Leonardo da Vinci. Omnipotence. This word could be said to be synonymous with Leonardo da Vinci. Not only Leonardo da Vinci himself, but also many scholars, and followers who knew Leonardo da Vinci in history recognized him. The personnel of Chaldea often sighed with emotion about Leonardo da Vinci's omnipotence. Saying that other existences were omnipotent in front of such a person, wasn't that a provocation to Leonardo da Vinci? Although Wu Ming didn't mean it, the speaker didn't mean it, but the listener did. It could only be said that this really confirmed Leonardo da Vinci's words. Be careful of artist followers, because artist followers were often some lunatics. Leonardo da Vinci. Calm down, please. The magic you emit has already affected the safety of the individual of our opposing incense, has been completely detected. Communication is also interfered with. Please restrain yourself. Indeed, Wu Ming's side did start to become noisy when he heard Chaldea's words. Leonardo da Vinci's kiss seems to be serious. It's over. I hope the doctor can stop Leonardo da Vinci from kissing. Matthew and Gadotzi began to pray meaninglessly. Wu Ming couldn't help but feel nervous at this moment. It was reasonable to say that he didn't have to be afraid of Leonardo da Vinci at all, but strangely, at this moment, Wu Ming didn't know why he felt a trace of fear. This was probably the uniqueness of artist followers, to be able to make Wu Ming feel afraid. However, in the next second, the sound of something breaking suddenly came from Gadotzi's bracelet. Beep! That was the sound of the communication being cut off. The communication was cut off. Gadotzi and Matthew were curious. It shouldn't be that weak, right? Could it be that Roman did something? However, Wu Ming looked at Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh's claw-gloved hand was still pointing at Gadotzi's direction. There was a trace of magic on the tip of the claw-glove's index finger. Apparently, Gilgamesh helped to cut off the communication between Chaldea and this side. This king just felt that the genius over at Chaldea's side is a little too noisy, and we are about to enter another magician's workshop. If the other party asks, just use this as an excuse. Most magicians' workshops did have the function of blocking other magic methods. This made Gadotzi and Matthew, who knew Leonardo da Vinci, brighten up when they heard Gilgamesh's words. As expected of King Gilgamesh, who can deal with so many desperate government affairs. Gadotzi thought of Gilgamesh's efficiency in dealing with government affairs not long ago. No matter what, he could easily get things done. As expected of King Gilgamesh. He actually found a solution so easily. Matthew looked at Gilgamesh with admiration. As long as Leonardo da Vinci calmed down and explained the reason with a proper reason, this matter would basically be over. A calm Leonardo da Vinci was a very reliable and approachable follower. You too, praise this king to your heart's content, ha ha ha. Probably satisfied that he solved the upcoming disaster. In an instant, Gilgamesh laughed heartily. Yes, King Gilgamesh. As if encouraged, Gadotzi and Matthew let out an amazing shout. Then Wu Ming made a little joke. Hyunryong, this king solved this problem for you. You should thank this king. Gilgamesh looked at Wu Ming happily. However, how could Wu Ming let Gilgamesh succeed? This is underground, I don't dare to shout. What if it collapses? This scared Gadotzi and Matthew, and they immediately shut their mouths. However, Gilgamesh still had a way to crack Wu Ming's trick. Humph. This place has been magically processed. How can it collapse because of a mere shout? It's simply an alarmist. Immediately afterward, Gilgamesh looked at Wu Ming, or rather, he glared at Wu Ming. What's more, this is a shout of praise for this king, how can it stop? Stupid. As if he was dissatisfied with Wu Ming for causing Gadotzi and Matthew's voices to disappear, he burst out swearing. Yes, my king, but shouldn't we get down to business? Wu Ming smiled helplessly at Gilgamesh. What are they here for? Your remonstrance is reasonable. This king won't fuss over your mistake. Let's go. This strategist's workshop is just a turn ahead. Gilgamesh said as he led the way. Really? Wu Ming shook his head helplessly, then followed Gilgamesh. At this moment, Wu Ming missed the past. Chapter 941. In the past, Gilgamesh often quarreled with Wu Ming like this. However, every time Enkidu acted as the middleman, Gilgamesh and Wu Ming would be fine in an instant. From an outsider's point of view, they might think that Wu Ming and Gilgamesh were quarreling. However, the two of them only looked fierce on the surface. In fact, they didn't seem to be quarreling at all. After growing up, Gilgamesh would call everyone bastard whenever he saw them. Although he wouldn't call Enkidu and Wu Ming that way, sometimes Gilgamesh's temper was so bad that even Wu Ming couldn't bear it. Enkidu would definitely persuade Gilgamesh with reason and emotion, in a gentle manner, but Wu Ming would definitely not be so gentle. As a result, there was the seemingly quarrelsome conversation just now. Over time, it became a way of saying things between the two of them. It could also be considered as a way to vent their feelings. Therefore, from the outside, Wu Ming and Gilgamesh, who seemed to be quarreling, were actually just having a normal conversation. Gilgamesh was clearly not angry. He was just indulging his feelings in front of his friends, family, and teacher, which led to the appearance of quarreling. Losing his temper to outsiders was out of anger, but losing his temper to his family was simply because the other party was his family. Moreover, it wasn't called losing his temper. In short, there was no need to have any concerns because to Gilgamesh, Wu Ming was his family. Although as a king, he didn't need to care about other people's feelings and could do whatever he wanted as a tyrant, there was even less of a need to hide it when facing his family. Especially after sitting on the throne of the sage king, and becoming the true king of people, Gilgamesh hadn't experienced something like this for a long time. After all, compared to himself when he was young, as the sage king, Gilgamesh's words would not be refuted at all, because the sage king's words were very correct. Compared to when Gilgamesh was young, there were still a few arrogant guys who kept remonstrating him. Now, in the Uruk imperial court, there were no unnecessary voices. After all, the sage king's words were right. Naturally, no one would ask for a rebuke. However, no matter what time it was, Gilgamesh always lacked a family member who could bicker with him, a family member who could objectively communicate with him regardless of whether he was right or wrong. Enkidu's personality was too gentle, so it was impossible. Only Wu Ming could fulfill this role. He was not only Gilgamesh's teacher, but also an existence similar to his adoptive father. Moreover, his thinking was quite avant-garde. More importantly, Gilgamesh couldn't defeat or subdue him. Gilgamesh couldn't fight with Wu Ming by risking his life and perishing together. Over time, this became the way Wu Ming and Gilgamesh talked to each other. Unfortunately, they still had business to attend to at the moment. Otherwise, Wu Ming wouldn't have minded talking to Gilgamesh for a while. Anyway, Enkidu was in the form of part of Wu Ming's spiritual base, and when Enkidu appeared, Gilgamesh would definitely be shocked to the extent that his face would change color. At the thought of this, Wu Ming's face showed a wicked smile. However, Wu Ming also thought of one of the demonic beast's commanders, the person who pretended to be Enkidu. This was also a world that he had to deal with personally. However, it was better to deal with the matter at hand first. When everyone turned the corner, they saw a door with a special formation engraved on it. The door completely blocked the road in front of them without any gaps. It looked like it grew naturally here. When Wu Ming saw this stone door, he felt an unknown magic power enveloping him. "Senior, do you feel it?" Matthew and Gadotsi whispered. "Yes, I feel it." Gadotsi nodded. "We've probably entered the range of the other party's noble artifact." Wu Ming wanted to take a step forward, facing the magic power emitted by the door in front of him, and walked to the front of the door. It was a circle formed by two large black and white fish intertwined with each other. There were 8 patterns that were very similar but had obvious differences in details. This was the formation engraved on the door. 8 trigrams. This is probably Zhuge Kong Ming's best formation, Stone Soldier 8 formation. Back at the Winterwood Singularity, Zhuge Kong Ming wanted to use the Stone Soldier 8 formation on Attila the Hun in an attempt to delay the other party and give Gadotsi and the others a chance to escape. However, Zhuge Kong Ming's Stone Soldier 8 formation had just been used, and it was countered by Sima Yi's mixed elements array that was specially designed to deal with Zhuge Kong Ming. Wu Ming finally witnessed the power of the Stone Soldier 8 formation here today. Colossus. At Wu Ming's command, the glowing dragon horn on Wu Ming's head, which was Colossus, suddenly expanded the light, and then immediately weakened. The light released by Colossus was used for scanning, and the light that expanded just now was like radiation, instantly scanning the surrounding area with this place as the center. "Master, everything underground within the largest range that I can scan is covered by an invisible magic power. Due to the uniqueness of the other party's noble artifact, if you're not close to here, you won't be able to sense the existence of this special magic power at all. Probably due to the uniqueness of the other party's noble artifact, although the range of the magic power was extremely wide, if one was not close to the source, one would not be able to sense it at all. Moreover, the entire underground area that was beyond Colossus's scanning range was covered. This is Zhuge Kong Ming's countermeasure to prevent the Uruk from being attacked by monsters from underground again." Wu Ming looked at Gilgamesh as he spoke. However, Gilgamesh did not answer Wu Ming directly. This king was having a headache about how to prevent the next underground attack from monsters. This king's military advisor has done this king a huge favor. Since there was a first time, there would definitely be a second time. Gilgamesh would not expect monsters to be like humans, who would give up after failing the first time. The safety of the Uruk could not be taken lightly by gambling. Coincidentally, Zhuge Kong Ming's noble artifact could prevent the enemy from invading. It could be used as the underground defense that gave Gilgamesh a headache. However, there was a price to pay. In order to cover the entire underground area, the expanded range of the Stone Soldier 8 formation could only be used underground, and the parts above ground could not be taken care of at all. Even so, almost the entire underground area that extended from the north wall to the Uruk was locked by Zhuge Kong Ming's noble artifact. Once monsters sneaked into the range of the Stone Soldier 8 formation from underground, they would immediately lose their direction and eventually return to the starting point. It was impossible for them to dig deeper and sneak into the Uruk to attack, because if they were to dig deeper, they would dig into Ereshkigal's mansion of the dead. Chapter 942. After paying the price of causing many monsters to die in the underworld, the monster commanders gave up on the idea of attacking the Uruk from underground. They had no choice. When the monster commanders tried to dig deeper into the ground where the 8 stone formations could not cover, they would reach the underworld if they dug a little deeper. There was no way around it. Although Ereshkigal's return did not bring the underworld from the entire Mesopotamia region, and some places could still be dug very deep, the idea of digging from the bottom to bypass the 8 stone formations was really unrealistic. After all, it was too deep, and it would take a lot of time and effort. Therefore, avoiding the underworld and bypassing the 8 stone formations from underground was really difficult for the monsters. Therefore, the monster commanders no longer tried to bypass the Uruk from underground. Setting up Zhuge Kongming's workshop underground and letting Zhuge Kongming use the noble phantasm was actually a defensive measure set up by Gilgamesh for the underground. This was a blatant scheme. With the noble phantasm covering the underground, the monsters could only go around or give up on attacking the Uruk from underground. However, the efficiency of going around the Uruk was too low. It was better to attack the Uruk directly from the north. At the very least, they could wait for the monsters to increase in numbers and let them attack from all directions. No matter how hard it was more practical than going around the Uruk from underground. Therefore, the monster commanders changed their minds and prepared to attack the Uruk from all directions. Wu Ming's first encounter with Yulidim was the vanguard. He went around the mountains to the back of the Uruk and waited for the opportunity to attack the Quetzalcoatl together with the monsters from the north, the mountains in the northeast, and the Persian Gulf in the southeast to take down the Uruk from all directions. At the same time, they could also get rid of the Quetzalcoatl on the surface. At that time, they only needed to focus on the goddess of the underworld. Wu Ming felt that the monster commanders were a little whimsical, or perhaps they thought too simply of humans and the Quetzalcoatl. The power of the feathered god had been mentioned before. Furthermore, it took a lot of effort for magical beasts to traverse mountains. Only magical beast commanders with unique physiques and abilities superior to mass-produced magical beasts would be able to traverse mountains effortlessly. However, with the command of the demonic beast commander, it wasn't impossible to mass-produce demonic beasts. But if that was the case, the number of demonic beasts would need to be terrifyingly large. Otherwise, how could they attack from all directions? It could only be said that the idea was good, but it was unrealistic. After all, there weren't that many magical beasts. He could only wait. There was no other way. After all, magical beasts also needed to be born. But now, even if there were enough magical beasts, perhaps the magical beast commander's plan to attack the Uruk from all directions couldn't be carried out. After all, whether it was the mass-produced Yulidim, Yujir, or Musamafu, more than half of the demonic beasts had been killed or injured. It was also because of the huge decrease in the number of demonic beasts that the demonic beast commanders in charge of attacking the North Wall had restrained themselves. The frequency of attacks and the number of demonic beasts had decreased, which was why Gilgamesh was able to find time to come here with Wu Ming, Gadotzi, and Matthew. And not only that, but the number of demonic beast commanders had also decreased from the original 7 to 5, the unknown person who had stolen Enkidu's body, the venomous dragon Basumu, the three-horned lion dragon Yujir, the seven-headed snake Musamafu, and the winged mermaid Kururu. One of the demonic beast commanders, Yulidim, wanted to devour Wu Ming in the southwest mountain, but was killed by Wu Ming instead. The other demonic beast commander, Yujir, was also killed by Ereshkigal. Although Musamafu escaped, it was really unpleasant. On the human side, the original 10 servants had been reduced to 11. Although Wu Ming had drawn Ishtar to his side, she was still the Sumer goddess, the mistress of the sky, Ishtar. Moreover, whether it was Wu Ming or Gilgamesh, what they valued was not Ishtar herself, but the bull of the sky that Ishtar had, Gugurana. Although it was a mythological beast, Gugurana couldn't be defeated by the number of servants, but by the quality of the servants. The unknown person who had stolen Enkidu's body was let go. After all, the other party was using Enkidu's body, and it would be best to capture him alive. The remaining 4 demonic beast commanders didn't need to worry about anything, and the remaining 4 demonic beast commanders were not small. When the time came to deal with these 4 demonic beast commanders, if Ishtar summoned Gugurana and let some servants cooperate with it, eliminating these 4 demonic beast commanders would not be difficult at all. The only thing that needed to be paid attention to was Basumu's poison. Even Gugurana couldn't ignore Basumu's poison. Both sides were at the same level, but it was hard to guarantee that Gugurana would be poisoned. However, if it was Fanbaba, there was probably a chance that it could resist Basumu's poison. As the mythological beast of the forest, Fanbaba was equivalent to the incarnation of nature, and it had a purifying effect. Even if it couldn't completely purify Basumu's poison, it should be able to weaken the poison or resist it. When Wuming left last time, he did let Fanbaba out of Yggdrasil and released it to this singularity. The purpose was to let Fanbaba help to create a wall of vines to protect the north wall and protect humans. As a result, Wuming didn't know where Fanbaba went. Its master had returned, but it didn't know how to find its master. By the way, Gilgamesh, do you know where Fanbaba went? Wuming suddenly asked Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh frowned. Weren't they talking about the 8 trigrams? Why did they suddenly change the topic? It was impossible for Gilgamesh to know that Wuming was thinking about so many things, but Gilgamesh finally answered Wuming. I don't know. After you left, Fanbaba helped the north wall construct a wall of vines, and then disappeared. Although the wall of vines in the north wall has basically been consumed, it is also thanks to Fanbaba's help at that time. Otherwise, this king's Uruk wouldn't know what would have happened. Fanbaba added a layer of vines before the north wall was completed. Following the vines, the efficiency was much higher. It could be said that without Fanbaba's help, the 11 magical beast commanders and a large number of enhanced magical beasts that suddenly appeared 3 months ago would have been enough to break the north wall. I'll go look for it later. After all, Fanbaba can also contribute to dealing with the magical beast commanders. However, Wuming's words attracted Roman's attention. Villo, is the Fanbaba you're talking about the Fanbaba that lives in the fir forest? Wuming wasn't surprised that Roman knew about Fanbaba. After all, if he could be passed down as a god, there was no reason why Fanbaba couldn't. That's right. What's wrong? If we can really find Fanbaba, it can be said to be a great support for us. Chapter 943. According to Sumer's legends, Fanbaba, the divine beast of the forest, had unparalleled power. It even imprisoned the mistress of the sky, Ishtar, leaving the gods helpless. In the end, it was Gilgamesh and Enkidu who worked together with some of the gods to subdue it. It was also because Gilgamesh saved Ishtar that he became involved with Ishtar, which led to the subsequent events of the Bull of the Sky incident. Roman stopped there. After all, it was not appropriate for him to explain the subsequent events in front of Gilgamesh. All in all, if we can find Fanbaba, it will definitely be as useful as the Bull of the Sky, Gugalana. No, it should be said that Fanbaba is indeed stronger than the Bull of the Sky. Is this true, assassin? Is Fanbaba really that strong? Gadotzi, who did not understand this, looked at Wuming, trying to get an answer. Probably. Wuming, who was deep in thought, casually replied. It seemed a little perfunctory. It could not be helped. Wuming's Fanbaba was not the same as the Fanbaba that Roman and the others understood from the legends. Wuming's actions in the parallel world were projected to other parallel worlds by the suppression force. In other parallel worlds, Wuming's legends and historical stories were modified. This was true, but it was limited to Wuming himself. Moreover, the parallel worlds could not completely copy Wuming's actions. There would definitely be changes. For example, the Gilgamesh in the parallel world that Wuming was in was a woman, but the Gilgamesh in this parallel world was a man. In this way, there would definitely be differences between the two sides. Wuming originally thought that the Fanbaba in the parallel world would be modified like Wuming's Fanbaba. However, when Wuming heard what Roman said, he instantly understood one thing. The Fanbaba in this world and his Fanbaba experienced different things. According to Roman, Fanbaba imprisoned Ishtar. Then, Gilgamesh and Enkidu were asked by the gods to rescue Ishtar, which led to the Bull of the Sky incident. However, Wuming's Fanbaba did not imprison Ishtar. Moreover, because Fanbaba and Wuming's holy lance Yggdrasil fused, after being retrieved by Wuming, Fanbaba basically did not appear in Mesopotamia. The Bull of the Sky incident in Wuming's parallel world was only because Ishtar lost her temper because she thought that she was fooled. Sure enough, Wuming was still relying on Ishtar to descend. Anyway, because the Funbaba was retrieved by Wu Ming. Wu Ming did not know the specific strength of Funbaba. Therefore, Wu Ming hesitated when answering Gadotsi. In the end, Wu Ming, who did not think that it would affect anything, chose to end the topic. I'll look for Funbaba later. For now, let's deal with the matter at hand. It was better to wait until they found Funbaba in the future. By the way, how do we get in? Wu Ming looked at Gilgamesh. This door should not be opened with brute force. There should be some kind of mechanism. Logically speaking, this door should have opened when we stood here. Since it didn't open, it's probably because Zhuge Kongming is busy inside. Gilgamesh was not anxious because Zhuge Kongming neglected him, because Gilgamesh knew that Zhuge Kongming's task was difficult. At this moment, as if it had heard Gilgamesh's words, the door in front of everyone split from the middle and slowly opened to both sides, revealing darkness. This was probably the so-called camouflage. King Gilgamesh, please forgive me. A familiar voice came from the darkness, followed by the figure of a young man who seemed to be in his 30s coming out of the darkness. The young man's face was the face of Ermero II that Wu Ming had seen before. Zhuge Kongming did indeed use Ermero II's pseudo-follower. Sure enough, it's Ermero II's pseudo-follower. Gadotsi and Matthew whispered to each other. Yes, Senpai, I just don't know who is inside this body. Judging from the other party's first sentence just now, it should be Zhuge Kongming without a doubt. Wu Ming also joined the small circle of the two and whispered to each other. If it was Ermero II, it was impossible to talk to Gilgamesh with words like, please forgive me. After all, Ermero II was a modern man, so it should be Zhuge Kongming who was from the ancient era. It's okay, how is the task given to you by this king? I'm doing the final processing, so I neglected you. Please come in and talk. Zhuge Kongming turned sideways and motioned everyone to go in and talk. Gilgamesh took the lead and went in, followed by Wu Ming. When it was Gadotsi and Matthew's turn, Matthew stopped and asked about Zhuge Kongming. Mr. Kongming, do you remember us? Zhuge Kongming shook his head. I don't remember anymore. It seems that you probably met another me somewhere else. Matthew's expression was a little bad, but Matthew wasn't disappointed with the answer. After all, it couldn't be helped. After all, servants were the avatars of heroic spirits. Along the way, they had met many servants that they had met before. However, some of them knew them, and some of them didn't. The most typical example was Leonidas I, who was currently in the North Wall. When they were in the Roman singularity, they encountered Leonidas I as an enemy. However, Leonidas I in the Mesopotamia singularity didn't seem to remember Gadotsi and Matthew. In short, Gadotsi and Matthew were used to it. Let's go in and talk. When the door of the stone formation is open, my noble phantasm will be temporarily ineffective. Although the demonic beasts wouldn't choose to attack from underground, they still had to open the stone formation. What if the demonic beasts used the same trick again? When Matthew and Gadotsi heard this, they both showed a panicked expression, as if they were embarrassed for delaying things. Sorry. Let's go in. After Gadotsi smiled awkwardly, she immediately pulled Matthew, who was also smiling awkwardly, and ran into the dark fog. In this regard, Zhuge Kongming smiled rather indifferently. Although the noble phantasm would indeed be ineffective for a while, there was no need to panic. Shaking his head, Zhuge Kongming then walked into the door, and in the next second, the originally split 8 trigrams slowly closed together.